Ever wondered what happens when you'll get all you favorite adult fictions at one place? Yay, you heard it right! Welcome to my Patreon. Currently, we have more than 200+ stories collections. Exclusive, uncensored, 18+ fan fiction awaits you. Stories too bold for the mainstream, crafted for true fans. Dive into steamy world of Harry Potter, Naruto, and Deku. Untamed passion and raw power. Only on Patreon. Ready to unlock the secrets? Join now, link in the description.
Now, today, we are gonna see, what if Devil Harry Potter was son of dragons? Join Patreon for early ACESS and exclusive content of Super Op stories, also adult and steamy Harry Potter stories too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. Harold Baratheon was the youngest son of Robert Baratheon, the king of the Seven Kingdoms and the protector of the realm. He was an odd little boy. He had unruly black hair unlike his other siblings. Fair skin, firm cheekbone and had an average height for his age. He was skinny but had a firm build. And he had the greenest pair of eyes you could ever see, even more than his mother. He seemed to be the perfect child on the outside, but he had a huge problem. He had the dreams. They are not normal dreams. When these dreams first started he could not remember. But he had them as long as he could remember. They always start immediately after he falls asleep, and when he woke up he could remember all of it with crystal clearly. And these dreams were strange for other reasons too. They seemed to stretch way longer than he sleeps. When he slept for 2 hours, in his dreams he spent about 2 days. But they were not the main problem. The main problem was the headache. It was so intense that every time he woke up, he could not help but cry out loud in pain. And the headache won't be gone for several hours no matter what. At first he could not understand what the dreams meant, just remembered it. As he was growing up, he started to understand the happenings in the dreams. He denied to talk about the dreams and claimed that he totally forgot about it. He knew having those dreams were extremely weird and didn't want anyone to know. He mentally grew up very fast due to those dreams and felt they were very personal. His parents tried everything they could do to help. They prayed to the old gods and the new, but the dreams remained. They once took him to the Godswood where they reached after a whole day journey, but that was the last. He was almost 2. Then and upon entering the Godswood he just started screaming due to sudden intense headache which stopped immediately after exiting the area. And that was the end of his treatment attempts. There was another strange thing about those dreams. They were very organized and would continue where the previous dream ended before. It was like he was living another life when he was asleep. He dreamed of a woman with green eyes and red hair and a man with glasses and unruly black hair. He figured they must be his parents. He also dreamed of a snake-faced man, cold high-pitched laughter and a burst of green light. It was a happy life until then. Then the miserable 10 years in the cupboard with his aunt and uncle. After that, a school of magic, friends and many exciting and dangerous adventures. And after that it was a true nightmare. War, fighting with magic and death of so many friends. In the dream life he had never had the chance to know his family and most of his friends died early in the war. And here he had a family. His father had absolutely no time for him and his mother did love him, but she also had a little time nowadays. Joffrey was not the big brother anyone should have. He was a big-headed scum just like Malfoy and ignored his siblings like they did not exist. Although Marcella and Tommen were fun to play with. This may be not the most loving family you picture, but it was way better than nothing, and for that he was grateful. His life was moving on in a same monotonous routine until Jon Arryn died. Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, died overnight and Lady Lya's Arryn fled that night with her only son to the Eyrie. Then 1 week later they started the journey to the north. The king wanted to make Lord Eddard Stark the new hand and offer the position personally. He was the king's best friend and the king knew he would refuse otherwise. 2 weeks passed and they were on the King's Road, which gone all the way to Winterfell. Harold had another dream. This dream was different. It was about a great battle on the school ground, and after so many losses on both sides, he was standing unarmed in front of the snake-faced man to sacrifice himself. Then there was a burst of green light and he was awake. In the past 5 years he spent 25 years of life in his dreams. It was an intense life and there was never a time when he was not in danger. That life was perfect until his parents died. The life with the Dursleys was truly miserable. So he was very happy when he went to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry for the first time. But there was a whole different level of dangers. In Dursley's all he could get was being locked up, starving and beating, but nothing life-threatening. But in Hogwarts not only his, but everyone's life was in danger. In his first year there was the troll incident and the Quirrellmort thing. Not to mention Fluffy the Cerberus and other traps. Second year was the worst. He sometimes wondered that how it was possible that no one died from the basilisk attacks. Third year was filled with terror of the one Sirius Black. But he was not the real danger. He was in fact innocent of all crimes except maybe the pranks. The danger was what he brought with him. Dementors. He almost lost his life twice to those soul suckers. Fourth year was another thing. With the dangerous tournament going on and kidnapped to the resurrection party of Voldemort. His fifth year was relatively safe if you discount Umbridge and Department of Mystery incident. Sixth year was actually danger-free except the Death Eater attack at the end of the year. And he never went for the seventh year due to Horcrux hunt, and then the war that started in full force. He wondered what will happen that he was now dead in his dream. Will he dream again? And will there be a new world? Or will the dreams simply stop? So the next night he went to bed and he waited in great anticipation for sleep to come. Eventually sleep did claim him. He woke up next morning dreamless and headache-free. He was both happy and sad at the same time. At last the mostly terrible dreams stopped and he would not have to deal with the headache again. On the other hand he would miss them. He learned to deal with the pain and the dreams were not always bad. There were some memories of his friends he absolutely treasured. But they were also dead so he decided not to dwell in those thoughts. The next 2 months was pretty uneventful. The pace of the journey was very slow to his liking. All his days passed sitting in the huge royal carriage and nights sometimes in some castles, which came across the path, or some inns in some towns are mostly intense. From the lack of doing anything he started to think about his dreams again. All those magical educations and the things he picked up during the war. He remembers quite clearly, even more than in the dreams. In Hogwarts he studied transfiguration, potions, charms, herbology, defense, astronomy and history of magic in the first 2 tiers. In his third year he chose care of magical creature, arithmancy and ancient rune as electives. He discovered that he was a natural in arithmancy and rune was like learning about the history of the ancient gods and a new language. He loved them both. Though at first Ron and then Dumbledore tried to talk him out of it and for once he refused them both and listened to Hermione's advice. He also learned a lot about healing magic, warding and advanced battle magic which included advanced transfiguration and charms during the running war. He then compared his knowledge with the present world and found potions. Herbology and astronomy are all almost useless in this world. Potions due to lack of ingredients and he yet to see any. Magical plants, so herbology was also out. Astronomy was a different matter and not actually completely useless. He recognized many stars but they were in the wrong places. And he figured it would be beneficial to remember the new arrangement if he somehow get that there was no indication that he had any magic, he just hoped how wonderful it would be if he had. The rest of the journey passed without anything important happening and they were in Winterfell. Anne. Please R&R. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Anne. Thank you for your reviews. I hope you like this one. Disclaimer. Everything belongs to J.K. Rowling and George R.R. Martin. I just do this for fun. The gods would. Brandon Stark loved climbing. Many times his mother asked him not to but he never listens. He just liked the thrill and feeling of being alone high on the abandoned towers. The bite of the cold wind, bird's nest. Lizards all were on those towers that he loved but what he loved most was the view. So he was on the roof of the eastern tower and was the first to get a glimpse of the king's convoy. He came down as fast as he could only to land just in front of his mother. Brandon, I saw the king. He's got hundreds of people. How many times I have told you no climbing. But he's coming right now, down our road. I want you to promise me, no more climbing. I promise, said Bran in a small voice, looking down his feet. You know what, you always look at your feet before you lie. Bran just smiled sheepishly. "Run and find your father. Tell him the king is close." Bran did just that, a dire wolf cub at tow. Arya Stark was terribly bored. She hated study and learning about customs and courtesy. All she wanted was to be a fighter. So she secretly practiced swordplay with the butcher's boy with a stick and tried to learn an archery on her own. She was even better than Bran at archery. She already tried many times to sneak in and so that she could learn more with the new recruits, but every time got caught. So when she learned about the king's coming to the north, she planned to disguise herself as a soldier and join the others, but got caught by his father again. So there she was, standing bored with the rest of his family and waiting for the king to come. Sue. Den sound of trumpet and the gates of the castle slowly opened and came the king's convoy. It took about 15 minutes to enter all of the king's men. Then the king came down the horse and all gathering to greet them fall to their knees. "My lord, Winterfell is yours." Eddard Stark, Lord of the Winterfell, Warden of the North, stated. The king came in front of him and pulled his old friend, brother all but blood, into a manly embrace. "Nonsense. Come, let's go to the crypts." Despite the protest of the queen, they did just that. Next came the feast after some rest. Prince Joffrey eyed Sansa Stark out of his corner of his eyes, and Sansa did the same. Of course Arya had to ruin the moment by throwing a potato to her sister. Sansa shrieked at her now ruined dress and tried to beat up Arya. Arya was already on her feet and Sansa gave her a chase. Harold was enjoying their antics and having a great time. Harold found the Stark children were very interesting. They all seemed to have their own pet direwolf, even Jon Snow. The bastard of Lord Stark had one. And even they were quite different from each other, they got along excellently. Robert Stark, eldest of Stark children, was a 15-year-old boy, and unlike Joffrey, he was the big brother you will be looking up to. He always paid attention to his brothers and sisters and also did his duties perfectly. He would scold Bran for climbing the castle and then ruffle his hair affectionately. Then give Arya tips about archery and swordplay. He would listen to Rickon what he had to say, and practice swordplay with Jon Snow and Theon Greyjoy whenever they offer. Although he never saw him interacting with Sansa, probably because she didn't like to hang around outside and not get the chance to see each other except for meals. Sansa Stark was a bit dull to his opinion. She was the perfect lady but was no fun and always scolded anyone who was misbehaving in front of her. She also seemed to like Joffrey, though he suspected that the feeling might be mutual. Rickon was about his age and liked playing around freely, and Jon for some reason liked to stay isolated from the crowd. He never once seen him during meals, not even at the feast. He found Arya and Bran to be most interesting. Bran liked climbing and he could be seen climbing the walls like lizard. And he spotted Arya spying on Uncle Jaime practicing and suspected she must be interested in fighting. And despite being busy playing host to the king, he noticed Lord and Lady Stark tried to keep track of all their children more than once. He felt a tinge of jealousy inside him. A week passed when his father declared during their breakfast that he wanted to go for a hunting. So when the king and Lord Stark left for the preparation, he was unsurprised to see both Barn and Arya looked visibly excited. As the hunting team left after breakfast for preparation, Arya and Bran quickly vanished around the corner. He was trying to make some friends here and got his opening. Bran must be gone for some climbing and thus following him was futile, so he followed Arya. She was very intent to follow the hunting party and didn't notice him, but the wolf following her did and started to growl loudly. Arya didn't even glance backwards and called, "Come on Nymeria, hurry or we'll lose them." When the wolf still didn't follow her, she looked back and saw little Harold cowering in the corner and Nymeria, her wolf, slowly nearing him. She immediately ran to them and physically dragged the wolf away from him. "Don't worry, she won't hurt you. But sometimes she tend to scare people." Harold was frozen in place. He was quite surprised at the wolf's behavior. It seemed wild. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes, she is quite harmless. I am training her myself," Arya said proudly. But he did not look convinced. He had a very good idea of harmless creatures in Hagrid's standard. The gamekeeper and later teacher had a really nasty affinity towards potentially lethal creatures. Ya noticed his skeptical look and commanded the wolf to sit. But to her surprise it didn't follow her command. "She won't hurt you," she persisted. "Are you sure?" Of course. At least when I'm with you. She added with a glint in her eye. Harold knew that look, seeing it countless times on Weasley twins. He wasn't completely assured but decided to believe her for now. Like he had a choice. He mentally scoffed. So, are you going to hunt too? He asked knowingly. Oh no, they must be gone. Arya groaned. No they are not. We can still catch them. He was already running towards the door and Arya and Wolf quickly followed. What better way to start a friendship with an adventure together, he internally chuckled. Once they were outside they saw no sign of the hunting team. See, they are gone. Arya said dejectedly. But we have the wolf. Harold countered. Of course. Why didn't I thought of that? Nymeria, follow. This time the wolf obeyed and they followed running behind her. Harold was struggling to keep up with them but barely managed. After 10 minutes running Arya noticed they were not going towards the main forest but going to the nearby smaller forest. She thought they must have gone this way. Sure enough, after directly crossing the forest they came upon a large clearing and could see the hunting team was halfway across the clearing. They stopped there for catching their breath. They seems too slow. We could catch up to them. Harold was still panting after 5 minutes rest. They must have stopped to the Godswood. Arya guessed. There are Godswood here? He asked warily. Of course. All the Northerners pray here. Oh, he still remembered the incident when he was 2 years old and didn't want to repeat that event. These Heartwood are some called Godswood ha. They some sort of negative reaction to him. They hunting party was now gone in the woods and Arya signaled the wolf to follow and they once again ran after them. However when they made to the main fours, they heard sound of hooves coming rapidly towards them but not from in front of them but from behind. They quickly hid behind a large bush to see that it was Theon Greyjoy. Towards the direction where the hunting team gone. What was that about? Harold asked. Don't know. I think something happened. Something important. She guessed, suddenly worried. They sat there for about 15 minutes then again there was sound of hooves. This time from the opposite direction. About 5 minutes later the whole hunting team followed by Theon rushed past them. This time they were both worried. So the Y immediately followed them but they were already halfway across the clearing. When they were crossing the small forest then they came stumbling upon the Godswood. When Harold first stepped onto the area he felt a pressure building inside of his head. Like someone is trying to enter into his mind. Now he recognized it's a Legolemancy attack. Stop! He screamed, head in his hands falling to his knees. And miraculously the pressure disappeared. But he still felt something just outside of his occlumency barrier. And he froze. His brain was now running miles per hour. He has occlumency barrier. That means all of those things are real. Magic is real. And he can do it. And this time he felt the intruder trying to penetrate the barrier again. It was not like how he felt in his dream world, it's like someone is probing not at any particular point, but all over the barrier at once. Like it was trying to collapse the whole barrier at once. Stop! He commanded again. This time mentally, and the probing stopped again. Harold, Arya was shaking his shoulder. Are you all right? Oh, was his reply. He looked at her blankly. Lower your shield, I want to see. A voice spoke on his mind. He almost jumped at the voice and looked around wildly. Arya started to say something but he gestured her to stop. Who are you and why do you want to see? He mentally asked. Because if I can't see inside of your head, I can't see your future. The voice said, like it was obvious. And why do you want to see my future? There was a pause and the voice seemed to be thinking before it spoke again. I just want to see. That's all. Sorry to disappoint you, but your curiosity is not worth my time. He did not like the voice at all. It sounded like whoever the voice belonged to believes it was his right to look into his mind. Aren't you curious about your future? This time Harry started to think. Knowing future is useful and all, but there is something in that voice sounded familiar. But he could not put his hands onto this. He was sure that he never heard that voice in his life, including his dreams. It sounded like he did something wrong to disappoint him. I am but I don't know you and I don't trust you. He said bluntly. My name is Brandon, and of course you can trust me. So what? Just name. I don't like people in my head. It's private. If the dreams are true, he wouldn't want anybody know. Even if people Know about his power. It would do him no good for them to know about the source. It will just add to the suspicion. My boy, it's for your own good. Brandon replied genially. Now, he recognized the voice. It was that manipulative old bastard Dumbledore once again. The voice sounds different but the tone was unnervingly similar. And that put him on more edge. He didn't want to be manipulated like that ever again. But he needed information. So, what are you? Harry asked curiously. I am a human, of course. But also a greenseer. What's a greenseer? We can see through trees. Harry was really astonished this time. Seeing through trees. Many possibilities started to play through his mind. Well, he said at last, so you can only see through these trees. More or less. What does that mean? That means we can see through these trees only, but can also feel through any other trees. What can you feel? Harry asked warily. Nothing much, Brandon conceded. We can just feel someone's presence. Well, that's good. So all he had to do is look out for the trees like these and his secrets will be safe for now. Then another thing hit Harry. How many are you? Once again he was worried. Of course, there could be many of them. Not everyone was like him. A lone wizard in the world. Once there maybe was magical people, but not anymore, he was convinced. If there were, then there would be stories about them like old Valyria. He heard rumors about magical people still lived in some cities across the narrow sea, but not anywhere near Westeros. Once there were some, but now I am the only one left. Came a sad reply. There are a few wargs left though. What? Asked Harry confusedly. Wargs can see through some animals and birds. Some. They vary from person to person. And they have their limitations. Can you see through the animals? He asked, once again wary. Yes, but I have my limitations too. Thanks God for some small mercies, Harold thought. This Brandon seems like a very powerful person. It's good thing he had limitations. Though he had to take his words for it. But he may know about other magical people like wargs. So are these trees magical? He asked. Yes and no. Looks like Brandon or whoever it was likes give answer cryptically. What do you mean? So he asked again. These trees are magical, but there are other trees that are not though lose like these ones. Are there any magical creature? Of course there is dragons. Any other ones? So, are you interested in magic then? Brandon asked, sounded interested. His mind was racing again. He won't let him know about him until he fully trust him. And it was kind of hard, someone invisible. Of course, who isn't? He kept his expression neutral. Brandon chuckled. Who indeed? So are there any people who can do magic? He asked. Yes and no. Again that annoying answer. Means, once there were an entire magical nation. But now all that left is some of their descendants having some particular gifts. Like wargs. How do you know these? He was genuinely curious about the answer. Brandon sounded like he saw those things happening. And how old is he? Oh, I saw them happening. Was the simple reply. So his suspicion was correct. He was some kind of immortal god, whom the Northerners prayed to. How old are you? And are you some immortal god? He asked, suddenly worried about offending a god. This time the voice laughed out loud. I told you already that I am a human and I am most certainly not immortal. When you see me you will understand. See you. Where do you live? Very far north. Many leagues beyond the wall. Wow. Was all he could say. He was astonished by the power of Brandon, that he can see through a tree from that distance. Now tell me, young Harold. What is your ability? What do you mean? I don't have any ability. Yet, he thought. Sure you do. You are the first person that I can't read. It's not normal, so you must have some power. So tell me, he asked expectantly. This can't do. He was not ready for anyone know about magic yet. So this conversation is over. Whoever Brandon was, he couldn't do him any harm. Right. Except for mental assault. He had now a lot to think about. Arya was watching Harry impatiently and asked several times what he was doing. But all Harold did was just mouth her later. It looked like something's going on. So Arya was startled when Harold suddenly grabbed her hand and ran towards the castle, dragging her in surprising force for a 5-year-old. And the wolf followed eagerly. What was that all about? Once they were outside she asked, picking up the pace. Harry thought quickly. What should he tell her? He didn't want her to freak out. So tried evading the question for now. Let's see what happened. Then I'll tell you. All right, she conceded. Bran was high on the west tower and wondering about things and enjoying the view below. Then he thought he heard someone. He was on an abandoned tower and no one should be here now. He moved quickly towards the sound, and when he was crossing a broken window he heard sounds again. When he looked he saw the Queen and her Rother Esser Jaime Lannister both completely naked, and they were both lying on the stone and moving very odd way. The Queen suddenly looked up and saw Jaime stop. Stop. When he stopped she added, pointing her finger, look. Jaime Lannister immediately got up and grabbed him by the collar. He couldn't get away quickly enough. You are the Stark child, aren't you? He asked. Yes. My name is Bran. And you like climbing, don't you? He asked, dragging him slightly towards the room and away from the window. Jaime, he saw us. The Queen said. Yes, I know, he replied. But, he saw us. She said again. Jaime Lannister was thinking something. The things I do for love, he said at last, and pushed Bran out of the window. Bran was too shocked to do something, and after being pushed he tried to grab the edge of the window but could not get a strong enough hold onto it. And he was falling and then nothing. Jon Snow was practicing out in the train yard. He was joining the Night's Watch and having some practice with Theon. Then there was a sound of screaming and they immediately ran towards it. He found Bran laying on a heap on the ground in an odd angle and unmoving. His wolf was howling besides him. And some maid was still screaming. Jon quickly ran and picked up Bran as gently as he could and ran towards Maester Lewis's chamber. Theon was standing there a bit longer and then ran to grab a horse. Someone needs to inform Lord Stark. And that's all for today. I know it's short, but the next chapter will be bigger and contain some actions. Please read and review. Chapter 3, and the first 2 chapters been rewritten. You should read them first. In this chapter there are certain parts that I copied from the main book and modified them slightly for the story purpose. You can skip those part if you want. From the next chapter canon events will progressively decline. So no worry. I hope you like it. Disclaimer. I don't own Harry Potter and Game of Thrones. And no character belongs to me. Children of the Forest. A cold, cheerless meal had been laid out in the morning room of the guest house. Jaime sat at table with Cersei and the children, talking in low, hushed voices. As Robert still abed, Tyrion asked as he seated himself, uninvited, at the table. His sister peered at him with the same expression of faint distaste she had worn since the day he was born. The king has not slept at all, she told him. He is with Lord Eddard. He has taken their sorrow deeply to heart. He has a large heart, our Robert, Jaime said with a lazy smile. There was very little that Jaime took seriously. Tyrion knew that about his brother, and forgave it. During all the terrible long years of his childhood, only Jaime had ever shown him the smallest measure of affection or respect. And for that Tyrion was willing to forgive him most anything. A servant approached. Bread and 2 of those little fish, and a mug of that good dark beer to wash them down. Oh, and some bacon. Burn it until it turns black. The man bowed and moved off. Prince Harold spoke up. Do you have news of Bran, uncle? I stopped by the sickroom last night, Tyrion announced. There was no change. The maester thought that a hopeful sign. I don't want Brandon to die, Tommen said timorously. He was a sweet boy. Not like his brother Joffrey. Lord Eddard had a brother named Brandon as well, Jaime mused. One of the hostages murdered by Targaryen. It seems to be an unlucky name. Oh, not that unlucky, surely, Tyrion said. The servant brought his plate. He ripped off a chunk of black bread. What do you mean? Cersei was studying him warily. Why, only that Tommen may get his wish. The maester thinks the boy may yet live. Tyrion gave her a crooked smile and took a sip of beer. Myrcella and Tommen gave a happy gasp. And Harold smiled nervously, but it was not the children Tyrion was watching. The glance that passed between Jaime and Cersei lasted no more than a second, but he did not miss it. Then his sister dropped her gaze to the table. That is no mercy. These northern gods are cruel to let the child linger in such pain. What were the maester's words? Jaime asked. The bacon crunched when he bit into it. Tyrion chewed thoughtfully for a moment and said, he thinks that if the boy were going to die, he would have done so already. It has been 4 days with no change. Will Bran get better, Uncle? Harold asked. His back is broken, little one, the fall shattered his legs as well. They keep him alive with honey and water, or he would starve to death. Perhaps, if he wakes, he will be able to eat real food, but he will never walk again. If he wakes, Cersei repeated. Is that likely? The gods alone know, the Maester only hopes, Tyrion told her. He chewed some more bread. I would swear that wolf of his is keeping the boy alive. The creature is outside his window day and night, howling. Every time they chase it away, it returns. The Maester said they closed the window once to shut out the noise, and Bran seemed to weaken. When they opened it again, his heart beat stronger. The Queen shuddered. There is something unnatural about those animals, they are dangerous. I will not have any of them coming south with us, she said. You'll have a hard time stopping them, sister. They follow those girls everywhere, Jaime said. Harold sat there listening to their conversations and thought about what happened. When he and Arya reached the castle and heard about Bran, Arya's first reaction was straight denial. But they ran to see Bran anyway. When Ey reached Bran's chamber, they saw Maester Lewis was talking to Lord Stark. Some other people were also listening to him, and he recognized all Stark children, Theon Greyjoy and surprisingly his father. They caught the last part of the speech and it was no good news. Spines broken and both legs shattered. He hit in the head as well, but not so severe. I did what I could and all we could do now is wait for him to wake up. Hearing his, Arya just froze in place, shaking her head, still in denial. That was the last time he saw any of the Stark children in the past 4 days. After breakfast, Harold was wandering around the castle and came upon the place where Bran was found. He looked up to see the tower. It was the highest tower of the castle and about the same height of the astronomy tower of Hogwarts. It's a wonder he is still alive. The tower looked abandoned for years and there were many places where parts of the wall were missing big chunk of stones. He did not have anything better to do, so he decided to do some investigating. He approached the gate and found stairs spiraling up to the very top of the tower. He started climbing the stairs and exploring any chambers and corridors he found. All the chambers were covered by thick dust and many had broken furniture. So about half an hour later he was very surprised to come upon a relatively clean chamber. It was a medium-size room and about the size of his own chamber. It had only one window and when he looked down through it he was very surprised to see the exact spot where Bran was found. He thought it was very odd for the chamber to be directly upwards from the incident and it was the only clean chamber in the tower. Then he quickly came to the middle of the chamber to inspect it more carefully. When he saw the spot of the incident through the window he was quite shocked. But it was nothing compared to what he found next. A single long blonde hair in one of cracks on the floor. The hair didn't surprise him. What surprised him was who it belonged to. It was his mother's. What are you doing here? A voice demanded. Daenerys Targaryen was never happy in her life. She had never seen the land her brother told her so much about. He said was theirs. This realm beyond the narrow sea. These places he talked of, Castle Rock and the Eyrie, Highgarden and the Vale of Arryn, Dorne and the Isle of Faces, they were just words to her. Viserys had been a boy of 8 when they fled King's Landing to escape the advancing armies of the usurper, but Daenerys had been only a quickening in their mother's womb. She had been born on Dragonstone 9 moons after the flight, while a raging summer storm threatened to rip the island fade. That storm was terrible. The Targaryen fleet was smashed while it lay at anchor, and huge stone blocks were ripped from the parapets and sent hurtling into the wild waters of the narrow sea. Her mother had died birthing her, and for that her brother Viserys had never forgiven her. She did not remember Dragonstone either. They had run again, just before the usurper's brother set sail with his new-built fleet. Sir Willem Darry and 4 loyal men had broken into the nursery and stolen them both, along with her wet nurse, and set sail under cover of darkness for the safety of the Bravosian coast. That was when they lived in Bravos, in the big house with the red door. Dany had her own room there, with a lemon tree outside her window. After Sir Willem had died, the servants had stolen what little money they had left, and soon after they had been put out of the big house. Dany had cried when the red door closed behind them forever. They had wandered since then, from Bravos to Myr, from Myr to Tirosh, and on to Qohor and Volantis and Lee, never staying long in any one place. Her brother would not allow it. The usurper's hired knives were close behind them, he insisted, though Danny had never seen one. Viserys was an arrogant man and very cruel to her. He would often beat her mercilessly and called that the wrath of the dragon. Though she had never seen a real dragon and often wondered about them. So when Viserys gave her a wonderful silk gown, she immediately became very suspicious. But said nothing because she didn't want to wake the dragon. A gift from the Magister Illyrio, Viserys said, smiling. Her brother was in a high mood tonight. The color will bring out the violet in your eyes. And you shall have gold as well, and jewels of all sorts. Illyrio has promised. Tonight you must look like a princess. Why does he give us so much? What does he want from us? She asked. For nigh on half a year, they had lived in the Magister's house, eating his food, pampered by his servants. Danny was 13, old enough to know that such gifts seldom come without their price. Here in the free city of Pentos, Illyrio is no fool. He knows that I will not forget my friends when I come into my throne. Viserys said. Danny said nothing, though she didn't believe it. Illyrio will send the slaves to bathe you. Be sure you wash off the stink of the stables. Khal Drogo has 1,000 horses, tonight he looks for a different sort of mount. He studied her critically. You still slouch. Straighten yourself, let them see that you have a woman's shape now. He said. You will not fail me tonight. If you do, it will go hard for you. You don't want to wake the dragon, do you? No, Danny said meekly. Good. Her brother smiled. He touched her hair, almost with affection. When they write the history of my reign, sweet sister, they will say that it began tonight. And then he was gone. This is it, she thought. Now her brother was selling her to some savage horse lord. She thought back her whole life again. Her life is going to change. For better or worse, she thought. Harold was extremely worried. He didn't know how it happened. When he heard the voice behind him he jumped in fright. And from the looks of it he hid something else. Magic. So he just sat there, head in his hands and cursing his bad luck. For the first time in his life he really did magic, and it couldn't be in any worse time. There it was, Robb Stark lying unconscious thanks to him for blasting him across the room. On the other hand, his mother's hair was found in this room. He thought furiously. Any reason her mother would come here. Maybe she came here after Bran's fall. Or it may be a coincidence. That she came exploring into the room before and upon finding it clean passed some time here. Or maybe someone planted her hair, though he couldn't think of a valid reason. Or maybe it was someone else's hair. Though that was also unlikely. He would recognize it anywhere. Or he could compare directly and thought of doing just that. He just shuddered to think the most likely possibility that she was doing something here and killed the witness. He refused to think about that until he had solid proof. Now the problem in hand. What to do with Robb? His first instinct was to get rid of the body somehow. But decided against it. He can't just kill someone because he saw him doing magic. At last he decided to leave him here and hope for the best. It looks like Robb was hit in the head, so he may not remember. Or if he did remember, then he can always deny to be there at all. Who will believe a 5-year-old can best someone 3 times his age? Robb came down from the tower late in the afternoon and declared that he was attacked by someone. When asked what he was doing there in the first place, he answered that he wanted to investigate the tower. And he didn't think it was an accident. And due to the fact that he was attacked on the crime scene, everyone believed him and thought the culprit must have been removing evidence. The castle was on an uproar, but Harold, though he himself very lucky that he got there first and Robb forgot about him. 2 weeks passed, and in this time Harold tried to collect any evidence he can. He never told anyone about the hair and kept it safe in a small bottle he borrowed from the maester's chamber, which was now secure inside his robe's pocket. He didn't want people jump into conclusion and still hoped that his main suspicion was wrong. His first mission was to collect a hair from her mother, which proved to be too easy. All he had to do was go to his mother's chamber and search on the pillow. But that caused another problem. If it was so easy, then anyone can implant it. But why would they do that? He wondered. So the next course of action was check that where she was during the attack. And that was the problem. He have to ask people questions, and as he was only 5, nobody will take him seriously. So he applied some subtlety here. So he asked around questions. About who found Bran. Did you visited him and when? Did you see anyone else visit him? Being a prince had its upsides, and even most people seemed annoyed by his questions but had to humor him anyway. And after all those questioning, he guessed the queen seemed no reliable alibi. But it also proved nothing. So the only thing remained to get to the bottom of this. Confront the queen. Jon Snow always tried to avoid Lady Stark. She was extremely cold towards him for being a bastard child. He never knew his mother, not even her name. And he always craved for mother's love. It wasn't his fault that he was a bastard. He often thought about it bitterly and did not help but envy the other Stark children. Even though Lord Stark allowed him to call father, he knew that he never had a place here, so he decided to join the Night's Watch with his uncle Benjen Stark. Lady Stark was there beside Bran's bed. She had been there, day and night. Not for a moment had she left Bran's side. She had her meals brought to her there, and chamber pots as well, and a small hard bed to sleep on. Though she had scarcely slept at all, she fed him herself, the honey and water and herb mixture that sustained life. Not once did she leave the room. So he didn't had the chance to see Bran for once. But now there was no more time. He stood in the door for a moment, afraid to speak, afraid to come closer. Lady Stark looked over. For a moment she did not seem to recognize him. Finally she blinked. "What are you doing here?" she asked in a voice strangely flat and emotionless. "I came to see Bran to say goodbye," Jon said. Her face did not change. Her long auburn hair was dull and tangled. She looked as though she had aged 20 years. "You've said it. Now go away." Part of him wanted only to flee, but he knew that if he did he might never see Bran again. He took a nervous step into the room. "Please," he said. Something cold moved in her eyes. "I told you to leave, we don't want you here," she said. Once that would have sent him running. Once that might even have made him cry. Now it only made him angry. He would be a worse dangers than Catelyn Tully Stark. "He's my brother," he said. "Shall I call the guards?" "Call them. You can't stop me from seeing him," Jon said, defiant. He crossed the room, keeping the bed between them, and looked down on Bran where he lay. She was holding one of his hands. It looked like a claw. This was not the Bran he remembered. The flesh had all gone from him. His skin stretched tight over bones like sticks. Under the blanket, his legs bent in ways that made Jon sick. "Bran, I'm sorry I didn't come before. I was afraid." He could feel the tears rolling down his cheeks. Jon no longer cared. "Don't die, Bran, please. We're all waiting for you to wake up. Me and Robb and the girls, everyone." Lady Stark was watching. She had not raised a cry. Jon took that for acceptance. Outside the window, the direwolf howled again. The wolf that Bran had not had time to name. "I have to go now. Uncle Benjen is waiting. I'm to go north to the wall. We have to leave today. Before the snows come. I wanted him to stay here with me," Lady Stark said softly. Jon watched her, wary. She was not even looking at him. She was talking to him, but for a part of her. It was as though he were not even in the room. "I prayed for it, he was my special boy. I went to the sept and prayed 7 times to the 7 faces of God that Ned would see. Change his mind and leave him here with me. Sometimes prayers are answered." Jon did not know what to say. "It wasn't your fault," he managed after an awkward silence. Her eyes found him. They were full of poison. "I need none of your absolution, bastard." Jon lowered his eyes. She was cradling one of Bran's hands. He took the other, squeezed it. Fingers like the bones of birds. "Goodbye," he said. He was at the door when she called out to him. "Jon," she said. He should have kept going, but she had never called him by his name before. He turned to find her looking at his face, as if she were seeing it for the first time. "Yes," he said. "It should have been you," she told him. Then she turned back to Bran and began to weep, her whole body shaking with the sobs. Jon had never seen her cry before. And he left her to that. He had one more person to say goodbye. Arya was in her room, packing a polished ironwood chest that was bigger than she was. Nymeria was helping by picking up clothes for her. But when she smelled ghost, she sat down on her haunches and yelped at them. Arya glanced behind her, saw Jon, and jumped to her feet. She threw her skinny arms tight around his neck. I was afraid you were gone. They wouldn't let me out to say goodbye, she said, her breath catching in her throat. What did you do now? John was amused. Arya disentangled herself from him and made a face. Nothing. I was all packed and everything. Septa Mordain says I have to do it all over. My things weren't properly folded, she says. Is that what you did, little sister? Well, they're going to get all messed up anyway. Who cares how they're folded? Septa Mordain, John told her. I don't think she'd like Nymeria helping, either. The wolf regarded him silently with her dark golden eyes. It's just as well. I have something for you to take with you, and it has to be packed very carefully. A present. Her face lit up. You could call it that. Close the door. Wary but excited, Arya checked the hall. Nymeria, here, guard. She left the wolf out there to warn of intruders and closed the door. By then John had pulled off the rags he'd wrapped it in. He held it out to her. Arya's eyes went wide, dark eyes, like his. A sword, she said in a small, hushed breath. The scabbard was soft gray leather, supple as sin. John drew out the blade slowly, so she could see the deep blue sheen of the steel. This is no toy. Be careful you don't cut yourself. The edges are sharp enough to shave with. He told her. Girls don't shave, Arya said. Maybe they should. Have you ever seen the Septa's legs? She giggled at him. It's so skinny. So are you. I had Mikan make this special. The Bravos use swords like this in Pentos and Myr and the other free cities. It won't hack a man's head off. But it can poke him full of holes if you're fast. Enough. I can be fast, Arya said. You'll have to work at it every day. He put the sword in her hands, showed her how to hold it, and stepped back. How does it feel? Do you like the balance? I think so, Arya said. First lesson, stick them with the pointy end. John said. Arya gave him a whop on the arm with the flat of her blade. The blow stung, but John found himself grinning like an idiot. I know which end to use, Arya said. A doubtful look crossed her face. Septa Mordain will take it away from me. Not if she doesn't know you have it, John said. Who will I practice with? You'll find someone, John promised her. Arya knew what was coming next. They said it together. Don't tell Sansa. John messed up her hair. I will miss you, little sister. Suddenly she looked like she was going to cry. I wish you were coming with us. Different roads sometimes lead to the same castle. Who knows? He was feeling better now. He was not going to let himself be sad. I better go. I'll spend my first year on the wall emptying chamber pots if I keep Uncle Ben waiting any longer. Arya ran to him for a last hug. Put down the sword first, John warned her, laughing. She set it aside almost shyly and showered him with kisses. When he turned back at the door, she was holding it again, trying it for balance. I almost forgot, all the best swords have names. He told her. Like ice, she said. She looked at the blade in her hand. Does this have a name? Oh, tell me, can't you guess? Your very favorite thing, John teased. Arya seemed puzzled at first. Then it came to her. She was that quick. They said it together. Needle. The memory of her laughter warmed him on the long ride north. Cersei was extremely worried. Why didn't the boy die? She wanted to scream in frustration. If he tells anybody, then there was no one that can save her and Jaime from the king's wrath. And there was the other Stark boy, he was another problem. Spreading dangerous rumors. Why did he had to think it wasn't an accident? And the mystery man, how she distastes mystery. At first she thought it was Jaime who attacked him. So the next day and she was alone with him, she started ranting about his stupidity. And when she learnt that person was someone else, she was once again wary. All she wanted to know was that, who was it? And why was he doing this? Cersei and Jaime was discussing about these, then a knock on the door sounded. When Jaime answered the door, she saw it was her youngest, Harold. Hello darling. Do you need anything? She asked. So many things were going on and she never did have enough time to spend with her children anymore. And she should have spent some time with at least Harold, being youngest and all. She felt so, guilt there, but squashed it as soon as it came. In troubled time like this she should be strong enough to handle anything. She noticed that he wasn't saying anything. Looking extremely nervous, something that was completely out of place for a 5-year-old. He was just standing there looking at his feet and playing with his hands absently. "Harold, something happened." He just nodded, still not saying anything. She then got up and walked up to him and put her hands onto her knees so she was at his eye level. "Why don't you tell me?" she asked gently. He nodded again and this time looked in her eyes. "Can I speak to you alone?" He looked towards Jamie apolitically. "Oh, don't worry boy, I'll be going anyway," Jamie told him in mild tone, and walked out of the chamber. Harold was very nervous about the confrontation. He mentally planned for many scenarios according to what he would find out. He loved his mother very dearly and couldn't think what he'd do if she. He shuddered, just thinking about it. He once considered to let the matter drop but knew that won't happen. He was a very curious boy and he was in trouble lots of times for it in his dream life. He even considered to postpone the confront next week looking for Stark children to see how they were doing. He found Arya first and was saddened to see the absence of normal mischief and life on her eyes. She told him about how Bran was doing and her brother Jon's departure. She also showed him her new sword needle after he promised not to tell anyone. He went to see Bran only once and saw Lady Catelyn Stark there with him. The condition there was very awkward and Lady Stark wasn't very pleased to see him there, so he quickly left. When only a week left and then they will start for King's Landing and he couldn't wait any longer. So there he was, in front of his mother alone in her chamber. When Cersei pulled him gently to sit on the bed with her, he followed. There was a moment of silence and the Queen spoke again. "What do you want to talk about?" "I was the one who attacked Robb," he blurted out. Whatever he had to say, that wasn't what Cersei expected. "What?" she managed to say. "I said, I was the one who attacked Robb," he repeated a bit forcefully. "Why?" She was still off guard and asked automatically. "Do you have anything to do with Bran's fall?" he asked directly. "No, of course not," she replied immediately, still not registering a word he said. Harold relaxed slightly, still staring intently in her eyes and trying to detect if she was lying. But that was short-lived because as his ds were sinking in, something strange happened. Suddenly he was in a vision. Uncle Jamie was laying naked upon him and he saw Bran looking at them through the window. "Jamie, stop, he said, but it wasn't his voice. When he stopped he added, pointing his finger, "Look." Uncle Jamie saw Bran and immediately got up, then grabbed him by the collar. Bran couldn't get away quickly enough. "You are the Stark child, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes, my name is Bran, and you like climbing, don't you?" he asked, dragging him slightly towards the room and away from the window. "Jamie, he saw us," he said in the feminine voice. "Yes, I know," he replied. "But, he saw us," he said again. Jamie was thinking something. "The things I do for love," he said at last and pushed Bran out of the window. Suddenly he was looking at his mother again. He jumped back away from her. He was disgusted by what he saw and his mind still trying to find any logic to deny that. Cersei knew something was wrong. He sat with his son taking and he suddenly asked the last thing she thought he would ask. She answered automatically and still processing what he was saying. And then for some reason she was in her memories watching Bran fall. She didn't even register that Harold wasn't in her bed anymore. And somehow the temperature of the room dropped, sending chills down her spine. When she looked at Harold she saw that he was backing away from her, shaking his head in denial. When she looked in his eyes she saw the undisguised horror in them. And then she knew somehow he found out the truth. Maybe he had spoken something that gave it away, but that doesn't matter. Then she saw fear in his eyes and before she could do anything he spun around and sprinted out of the door. Harold was still backing away, shaking his head. He saw his mother looked at him in the eye. He saw confusion at first, then understanding and then something else that sent chills down his spine. He panicked and sprinted away from the room. He was running as fast as he could. Tears streaming down his eyes and obscuring his vision, but he didn't stop. His only thought was that he had to run away. The vision was of course true, he knew it. It was legilimency he used so many times in the war in his dream life. Memories can be altered or fabricated, but he knew a true memory when he saw one. He couldn't help but laughed a little about his use of magic. He was very excited at the possibilities of doing magic for real, but now he couldn't find any of his enthusiasm left. He was still running and almost at the exit of the castle. Then he ran onto someone and sent both trembling down to the ground. He landed very painfully on his elbow and heard a groan from a familiar voice. It was Arya. Arya got up and pulled him up. His vision was still obscured due to crying and heard her asking anxiously, "Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine," he managed. He rubbed his eyes tiredly to clear his vision. "Why are you crying then?" she asked. He opened his mouth to speak something then stopped. He heard footsteps running down the halls. He looked at that direction and saw Jaime Lannister was running towards them. He panicked again and did the only thing he could do. Ran in the opposite direction. But Jaime was quickly closing the distance and he rounded a corner only to find a dead end. He looked back to see Jaime was still coming and closed his eyes in fright. He was expecting to get caught and got caught. He did. But not by Jaime Lannister. He suddenly felt very cold and opened his eyes. He was not in the castle anymore. He was now standing in the small forest near the castle and surrounded by about 15 people. He remembered something familiar happened in his dream life when he apparated to the school roof. Well, what do we have here?" one of them said. "It looks like we got one of the children of the forest for ourselves. Men's would be so happy." Harold took a quick look at his surroundings. He was far away from the castle and in the forest and nobody can see what's happening. So no hope for help coming. Wait, how about apparition? He immediately closed his eyes again and tried to remember the 3Ds. But his attempt was unsuccessful. Maybe he need to be more adept to magic to successfully apparate. Then he observed the group. There were 15 of them. He looked into their clothing. They all were wearing some animal fur and looked like they live in the forest. They must be the wildlings he heard so much about. But never heard them seen south of the wall. What are the wildlings are doing south of the wall? And how did they cross the wall? He thought. Some of them were really young, about 14 or 15. Some looked older but no one was more than 40. The leader seemed to the eldest. They all had different types of weapons, axes, knives of different sizes, 2 had swords and 2 with bows. They were all looking at him expectantly and despite no weapon was pointed towards him. He noticed that they were all in high alert, ready to draw at moment's notice. He knew all about the children of the forest of course and realized they thought him one. He couldn't fault them though. Anyone would jump into that conclusion after seeing a child suddenly appear from the thin air in the forest. "Well, you are coming with us," the leader decided. He seemed somewhat nervous under his scrutiny. "No, I'm absolutely happy where I am," replied Harry confidently though he felt none of it. He was terribly outnumbered here. And they looked like they were experienced enough to thoroughly flanking him. No one was in line of fire from other. "But we found you. And you have to come with us. You must help us fight with the others." He didn't understand what did he meant by the others and with such fear. He assumed he meant some other terrible savage tribe. But why would I do your fighting? He decided to play along. As long as can pretend he was one of the children, they won't dare hurt him. But he was terribly wrong. As soon as he said that part all weapons were on him in less than a second. They all seemed very angry, though why he could not tell. "You will abandon our people and save yourself," the leader bellowed angrily. Others seemed equally angry. They seemed to have forgotten that they, themselves abandoned their own people to save their sorry asses. He Ned his mouth to point that out and a girl pointing an arrow towards him spoke. She looked like 14 or something. "You were right Egri, let's take him," the leader said. Then they all started to advance upon him together and he tried to make a run for it. But that was clearly a mistake. He didn't even move 2 paces an arrow flew towards him and struck on his right thigh. Excruciating pond and he immediately slammed to the ground. As everyone was closing in to make a grab on him, he panicked and screwed his eyes shut and wished they would stay away from him. And bang! He opened his eyes, to see everyone on the ground and sporting different sort of injury. 4 were not moving and another 2 looked almost unconscious. He quickly started to get up and tried to ignore the pain in the leg. But all of the wildlings also got up, except the 4 unconscious ones and once again surrounded him. This time the girl who hit him approached quicker than he expected and hit his head hard with the end of the bow and he lost his consciousness. I wrote this from different POVs. If you like Harry's POV more, then let me know. Please R&R. AN2. Next chapter will be up as soon as I finish it. Shouldn't take more than a week. Chapter 4. Anne. Sorry for the slight late update. I had some bad news and don't want to talk about it. Now it is mostly Harry's paw. Tell me how you like it. Disclaim. I don't own Harry Potter or Game of Thrones. Sometimes I wish I did though. Beyond the wall, Harry was on a basket on the back of a man. He was not very comfortable with the position but had no choice. When he tried to protest but Clawfoot just said, "Would you rather walk?" That shut him up. All of them were going on foot. It was very cold out there and light snow was constantly falling from the sky. They were not following any trail or road and making their own way through the forest. In a weather like this was not very easy or quick work. The constant cold breeze wasn't also helping any. But they were a very persistent lot. He observed. None of them had any complaint, and despite all the difficulties they were making good progress every day. They were traveling all day non-stop in UTI, losing as much daylight as possible and stopped only when they couldn't see where they were going. They camped every night in some secure area where fire can't be seen from distance, but they always light a small one anyway. After being kidnapped, he first woke up in a similar camp. He was laying by the fire. It was a busy camp and everyone was doing something. Most of them were sharpening their weapons or making arrows. 2 were cooking something, some were trying to set up a tent nearby. He thought he was unguarded there and no one was looking at him. He tried to get up and immediately gave it up as a bad idea. He felt a throbbing pain on his leg and a groan escaped his mouth. "You are awake," a voice spoke suddenly from somewhere above his head. He almost jumped in fright and cursed as the pain shot through his leg again. He looked up and saw it was that girl who shot him with the arrow. She had curly brown hairs tucked under some hat and had a pair of big blue eyes. She was rather short in height but looked strongly built, he thought. She was wearing some rags over her fur coat and looking at him unblinkingly. He felt angry at her because she shot her. "You think so?" he said sarcastically. But she ignored the tone and asked instead, "Are you really a children of the forest?" She tried to ask neutrally but couldn't keep the curiosity out of her voice. He didn't want to talk to her right now, but the question caught him off guard. He thought if it would be a good idea to tell her that he was in fact not a cough. He was wary that they might feel him useless and kill him. "What do you think?" he asked cautiously. "I don't know," she replied hesitantly. "You seem like one, but you are supposed to be very powerful." "Do you think I'm not powerful enough?" he asked indignantly. "Then why are you still here? Being captured by us?" She shot back. "Maybe I wanted to go with you," he defended. She snorted, clearly not believing him. "So why you are still lying here and not healing yourself with magic?" she challenged. "I just woke up," he replied automatically. "Go on then, heal yourself," she prompted. "I can't." At her triumphant look he asked resignedly, "What if I'm not a cough? Will you kill me?" "No, I won't," she replied angrily. "Cough or not, you have some power at least and we could use all the help we can get." She sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Harry thought she was angry because of sudden show of emotion and tried to cover it up. He relaxed slightly and asked again, "So what do you think?" "I don't know." She was clearly frustrated. "Are you?" He thought if he should tell her. Could he trust her? It was the first time he was speaking to her and she shot him before, but he felt like he could trust her. He didn't know why though. I'd be her sudden show of emotion or her frustrated tone, which sounded exactly like Hermione when she couldn't figure something out. Or the concern in her eye when he asked her if she would kill him. So he decided to tell her the truth. "You promised not to tell anyone?" he asked. She hesitated. "All right, I won't tell anyone. I'm not a COF," he confessed. At her resigned look he quickly added, "But I am powerful. Or at least will be if I am old enough. If you live that long," she muttered under her breath. He decided to ignore the comment and asked instead, "What do they think?" He pointed to the people working around. "Some of them think you are and some are just confused what to believe," she replied. Then the food was ready so they couldn't discuss the issue further. It was not much, just some meats roasted on fire and dried fruits, but he ate that hungrily. He heard from the girl that he was unconscious for 2 days and thought that was the reason for his sudden hunger. The girl, he thought. I didn't get her name. so he asked in between the bites, "What's your name?" "Eagry. What's yours?" she asked. "Harry Potter," he replied without missing a beat. Harry had a lot of time to think about what happened in the Winterfell. He did accidental magic for the first time. And then he used legilimency on Cersei. That very day he disapparated from the castle and got away from Jaime. Cersei, Jaime, he thought. Not Mother or Uncle Jaime anymore. He was more upset for Cersei than Jaime, though Jaime was the one who pushed Bran out of the window. But he wasn't inside Jaime's head though, and vividly remembered about Cersei's feelings in the tower. She felt worried that someone saw their little incest, then afraid that Jaime was letting the boy go when he pulled Bran away from the window. And at last relieved when Bran was pushed through the window. He could hear the regret coming from Jaime's voice, but not once he felt any bit of regret or remorse coming from her. She didn't care about anyone getting hurt for having her way. She was always cold, distant and ruthless to everyone who didn't concern her. How did he not see that before? He thought furiously of Sue. He saw her distant behavior but didn't actually care before, he realized. He was just happy that he had a loving family and completely overlooked anything else. Now he thought about it and realized he should've. He also realized that he didn't consider her mother anymore. Now when he thought about his mother, a face came into his mind that wasn't Cersei's, it was Lily's. And he didn't even thought himself as Harold Baratheon anymore. He was Harry Potter now, son of Lily and James Potter. Eagry sometimes joked about his name. "So you make pots?" "No, maybe our ancestors did and now I'm stick with this stupid name," he would answer mock indignantly. She would laugh at that. She became his new best friend and they passed a lot of time together talking and doing stuff. Harry had heard a lot of stories about wildlings before. All of them were about their lack of intelligence and what mindless beasts they were. He heard they were completely uncivilized and barbaric. They kill each other for the simplest things and eat each other. They don't have any leader, rules or justice. They are complete savages and we are lucky that the Night's Watch is keeping them away from us on the wall, Cersei would often tell him. Now he found all of them utter rubbish. The wildlings were actually very hard-working people. They were not mindless and most of them they don't eat each other, and though they didn't have any particular rules but they clearly had leaders, as he looked at Clawfoot again. But when he asked Eagry about it she didn't laugh. She told him there were actually a lot of people exactly like what he told her. They ate human flesh and always at war with someone. They would kill their mother if they think she would taste good. Same can be said for the mothers. Then he asked, if they eat each other then why they are so many more people they kill, many more just join them. She replied with distaste. When he asked about leadership and rules she just replied, we are free people and we don't bow to anyone. Then how do you solve your problems? He asked, a little perplexed. You solve your problems yourselves, was her reply. But here you have a leader. He gestured towards Clawfoot. And you said about a king beyond the wall. We follow someone when needs arise. And what need is that? He asked. You'll find out soon enough. For some reason, she sounded regretful. He was now thinking about the wildlings in a new light. Maybe they were always at war, there was no laws and you have to watch your own back, but he was used to this life. At least he could get away from all those awful people he once called family and no one will ever find him, he thought. Cersei didn't know what to do. Her baby boy had found out about her secret and just ran away from her. She couldn't forget the disgust, hurt and fear in his eyes. Her own son is afraid of her, she thought. What was he thinking? She would kill him. She remembered that was her first intention, but that was pure reflex. If it was anybody else she wouldn't let him go outside of this room alive. But he was her own son. And he was just a baby, she was sure she could convince him with anything. But he needs to find him first before he did anything stupid. She broke out of her trance and shouted for some servants. When two maids came hurriedly, she ordered them to find Jaime and send him to her chambers immediately. She waited for him impatiently. About 5 minutes later Jaime came running and asked, what happened? He knows. Who knows what? Jaime asked in confusion. Harold knows about the boy and he just ran out of here. She replied angrily. Sometimes Jaime was so thick, she thought. What boy? Jaime was still confused. Then he understood. Oh, shit, Yes, now go get him, she ordered. Jamie ran out of the door again and ran towards the entrance hall. When he entered the hall he saw his nephew was talking to the Stark girl. Then Harold looked his way and ran. He was already out of breath but followed hurriedly. He didn't stop to see a surprised Arya following him. Harold was only 5 and couldn't run very fast, so he wasn't worried about catching him. He was worried about what he was speaking about with the Stark girl. He saw him go around a corner and followed. He was extremely surprised to find himself alone in a dead end of an empty corridor. Then something bumped into him from behind. He looked behind and saw the Stark girl. She was on the ground from the impact and glaring at him. Then she noticed that the two of them was alone there. "Where is he?" she asked. "I don't know. He was just round the corner and just vanished." He was still trying to figure out what happened. "But it's a dead end," Arya said. She was sounding a little perplexed too. "Is there any secret passageway?" Jamie asked urgently. "Not that I know of," she replied. So both of them searched every inch of that corridor but found nothing except some rat holes. They were talking while searching for possible escape route. "Why you were chasing him?" Arya asked. "He had an argument with his mother and ran away from there. She told me to get him." He told her truthfully. "So what were you two talking about? Did he say anything?" Jamie asked anxiously. Arya didn't notice. They were both that subtle. "No, we bumped into each other and he was crying. So I helped him getting up and asked him if he was all right. Then you came along chasing him," she replied, and Jamie relaxed. Of course Arya didn't notice that either. Jamie searched for Harold all day but couldn't find him. He didn't return his chamber that night either. The next day news spread that Harold Baratheon was missing. The whole castle was on an uproar again and every brick of it was turned to find him. But there was no clue where he was gone. It looked like he just vanished in thin air. Then search parties were sent outside of the castle. They searched high and low. Ravens were sent to different places if they knew anything. And after 4 weeks all the search parties returned empty-handed and without any clue. The king's men stayed for another month to search for him once more but only to fail once again. So the king's men along with Lord Eddard Stark and his 2 daughters and some of his men left Winterfell 2 months later than planned. Harry talked to Clawfoot a week ago at Ygritte Insiston. And told him what he told her about him. He was a large man and his feet wasn't anything like claws as his name suggested. He just grunted and didn't say anything when he told him that. Nothing changed after that except the man who was carrying him refused to carry him again. So to his great shame he was on Ygritte's back for the next week. Harry was healing quickly. The arrow didn't damage any vessel or nerve. Just went clean through the muscles. So after 2 weeks he was walking with the others. The people who he knocked unconscious or injured accidentally, all were up and all right. It looked like somehow he stunned the 4 and others were knocked off their feet by magical backlash. He didn't ponder much about how it happened, he was just happy that nobody was truly hurt. Harry and Ygritte talked a lot and one day he asked her about her family. She told him she never knew her father and grew up with her mother. She died last year in a raid from the enemy tribe. After that she joined Mance Rayder with the other people here. He said his condolences about her mother which she received solemnly. Then he asked about Mance Rayder and why they were following him. He asked about this before but she always avoided the question. So he was surprised when she answered, "We don't believe in leadership most of the times but winter is coming. We need to work together if we want to survive," she replied. "But I thought it was Stark family motto." He was confused. "A wise family then," was her reply. "So what happens when winter comes?" he asked. "You don't know." At his shake of head she continued. "During winter it is always cold. Not cold like this one, it is colder. You can't breathe in that. Your tongue will freeze instantly if you open your mouth. Your piss will freeze before it hit the ground." At Harry's skeptical look she added, "I didn't see the winter but my mother told me that. And I believed her. She told me, after a long summer will come a long winter and with that the others will come." She shuddered. This was the second time he is hearing about this others and now he thought it may not be some enemy tribe. So he asked her, "What are the others?" She looked at him like he was mad. "You don't know about the others." He just shook his head. "Others are dead things. They are cold and always comes with the winter. Like winter isn't bad enough. You can't kill them because they are already dead. You have to burn them. Harry thought about the infairies in the cave, where he went with Dumbledore and shuddered involuntarily. So why don't you burn them? He asked. We would if we could. But we don't have much woods to burn them all during winter. We'll die in cold and become those dead things. Then, she shuddered again. Not if you have magic you won't, he thought. Why did you came south of the wall? He asked, trying to change the topic. Because we saw them, she replied. Saw who? He asked confusedly. The others. She didn't laugh at him this time for his ignorance, and he understood she was serious. Not his godfather, of course, he mused nostalgically. So that's why you erring. So what's changed? He asked. She didn't look pleased to the word fleeing but answered him anyway. You happened, she snapped. And now you know I'm not that all-powerful and mighty. He helpfully added, ignoring her tone. We thought we'll be safe this side of the wall. But what if the wall's not enough? We plan to go more south, but your people will hunt us down if they know we are there and kill us or send us back to the wall if we are lucky. So we were going back anyway, she answered. He was thinking about that and found her right. Nobody had any sympathy or care for the wildlings. They'll do just that, so he nodded in agreement. He also talked to others in the group when he could and found that in their society men and women are equals and had the same responsibilities, unlike the southern kingdoms where women are always inferior. He quite liked the sentiment. Harry saw Wizardry practice archery every day when they set up their camp. After getting back to his feet one day, he approached her during her practice. You are good. She didn't say anything to the compliment and just nodded her head in agreement. Will you teach me? He asked hopefully. You want to learn? She asked, and he nodded his head vigorously. She laughed at his enthusiasm and ushered him to come to her. He was surprised that he was allowed to learn. He remembered too well that Cersei had denied him every time he asked her. He also remembered in his dream life he was not allowed many things just because he was too young. So he started to learn archery from Wizardry from that day. He wanted to try her bow but was unsuccessful. It looked so easy to draw when she did it, but he found out it's not. So she made a new one for him to practice his aim for now. He also expressed his interest in blades and she confessed that she was not very good at it. But they practiced with sticks anyway. Harry was adapting to his new routine very quickly. They got up before dawn and started packing everything. Then after a cold meal they started walking. They stopped only to eat sometimes when food was running low and sometimes for a very short break. When light started to fade from the sky they would stop and send some scout ahead to find a suitable place for camping. Is time others rested for a while and Harry practiced with his bow. Sometimes Wizardry joined him to practice swordplay with sticks. After the camp settles down they would talk about different things before meals and then went to sleep. Wizardry asked about his family many times and he avoided most of the questions. He told her, both of his parents died when he was 1 and raised by his aunt and uncle who hated him. It wasn't entirely a lie. It actually happened in his dream life. He could tell she knew he was hiding something but didn't press the matter, and he was grateful for that. They also talked about his powers too. He confessed that he actually didn't have any power and all he did was just accidental magic. Then he told her with more details what he could do when he will be old enough to do magic. He told her about conjuring fire, blasting things, transfiguring objects, making objects fly and many other things. She was skeptical but he could do nothing to make her believe for now. He started to think about it after the first time they had this conversation. He recalled all his magical study again. He didn't have a wand, so he couldn't do most of the magic for now. In his dreams, he learned wandless magic but it took him several years of hard work, and even then all he could do was some less powerful spells. He then thought about what magic he could do without a wand. The name came almost instantly. Mind magic, and it mostly didn't involve a wand. He had to work very hard to master occlumency. He remembered very well about Snape's Tortious lessons. But he was pleasantly surprised when he found out he was a natural legilimens. It took him only 2 months to master the art and he could enter most people's mind without them noticing and without a wand. It proved very valuable during the war. He knew he was an occlumens thanks to Brandon in the Godswood, and he did legilimency once already, though the circumstances was not very pleasant. So he tried to read mind from then. He found out, with a bit of focus he could still see what other people were thinking. But it needed direct eye contact. He practiced on every one of the group from then on. He didn't tell anyone about it, not even Igri, because he remembered very well how angry he was when he first found out Snape and Dumbledore were using legilimency on him. He felt a little guilty about invading other people's privacy but thought, what they don't know can't hurt them, right? He also decided to try runes and thought of the things he could do with it. It would make life easier, he thought. So, he tried to recall everything he could remember about runes. Ancient runes was his favorite subject from his 3rd year. He studied all his 3rd year materials in a month. Then he ordered the 4th year books and finished them too. It took him even less time. He remembered, Hermione was very frustrated about it, because for the first time she was second in any subject. He took his ancient runes at the end of the 3rd year. Much to Professor Babbling's delight and Dumbledore's displeasure, he got an outstanding with distinctions. He took his newt in the next year and got an outstanding too. Next year he studied independently but couldn't progress much due to owls. In his 6th year he couldn't concentrate much in anything due to the regular mental attack by Voldemort. During War he learned a lot about warding and curse breaking from Bill Weasley, a former curse breaker from Gringotts. He found out, he remembered all the runes and then his main problem was powering them. He could easily power runes wandlessly in his dream life and decided to test it first. So he craved runes to prevent cold to his shoes with a sharp rock he found some days ago. It was almost dawn and he was finished and couldn't wait to power it up. So he picked up a shoe and concentrated on the feeling of his magic. It took a while and eventually he found the feeling and tried to channel his magic into the runes. The runes on the shoe glowed white for a while and returned to normal. He was very happy that he could power the runes wandlessly and slumped unconscious from exhaustion. He slept for the whole day despite everything Igri did to wake him up, and ultimately she had to carry him again. The next 2 weeks he had to be carried by Igri almost every day. He was so enthused about runs that he couldn't care about his exhaustion or being carried by a girl every day. But he was getting better and was less exhausted every next day. In this time, he made his clothes protected against cold, waterproof, fireproof and impenetrable. He also added these features to his shoes, gloves and hat. He told Igri about his project after the first day. She scolded him for exhausting himself. Hen asked what good are these drawings that took so much out of him. When he told her what he could do with runes she was skeptical. So he made her a pair of auto-warming and waterproof shoes to impress her, and after trying those on she was very impressed indeed. She said that the hard work of carrying him around like a baby was worth it. With slight legilimency probe he found that she actually liked to carry him around. When he teased her about it she just blushed but didn't deny that. After a 40 days journey on foot they reached the wall. Though Harry got his first sight of the wall about a week before, he couldn't help but gaped open-mouthed at it. It was truly magnificent. He could feel magic literally oozing out of it. It was made of purely ice and its most incredible feature was its size. It was spread to the either side as long as he could see. And its height was most impressive. He was about 100 meters away from the wall but he had to crane his neck upwards to see its top. How the hell did you climb this thing? He wondered aloud. It was hard. We lost half our men, Ted from behind solemnly. He didn't look behind to see who answered him. He just kept gaping at it. How am I gonna climb this thing? He asked no one in particular. But it was Igri who answered this time. If we are lucky, we don't have to. What do you mean? We found a tunnel under the wall. After we climbed down this side. She replied bitterly. He could sympathize to that. Anyone would be angry after losing half of their team to find out they could do it without even breaking a sweat. That's good news, right? He asked. If it's not too sealed. At Harry's confused look she explained, it was almost sealed when we last saw it. It was only wide enough to pass one at a time. But luck wasn't on their side. They found out the tunnel easily enough. But was blocked after about halfway through the path. They debated whether they should dig their way out or again climb the wall. Most of them wanted to dig rather than climb the wall. So, they made a camp in the forest near the tunnel and started working right away. But the Night's Watch is supposed to guard the wall. Won't they see us? Harry asked when they were setting up tents. Crows don't come this far. They just guard the area near the Castle Black, replied a Gorgie, a 16-year-old teen. Why not? How should I know? He snapped at him. It was hard to dig in the frozen land and the lad seemed a bit irritated, so he didn't bother him more. The sealed tunnel was as hard as a rock. They didn't have proper instrument to dig up, but they started working with whatever they had. It was a very slow work, and even more cold inside the wall wasn't helping any. At least there wasn't any cold wind like outside. RRY had learned one more thing in those days about the wildlings, that they were very stubborn and persistent. If they set up their mind into something, they will try to do it as hard as they could. So, despite their extremely slow progress, they worked around the clock. Looks like they prefer to do this taxing labor than the perilous climbing, he thought. In those days he trained more for his aims the bow, and also practiced with his stick sword with Weasley. Harry had seen swords fight in the King's Landing in the tourney of his brother's name day, but the fighting style of the wildlings were completely different. Where the knights were clad with heavy armor and couldn't move very fast, the wildlings were very fast and light on their feet. The knights fought methodically and they had certai rhythms, but the wildlings were unpredictable and they each had their own style. During their practice others often looked and sometimes gave suggestions. He was at first very confused which to follow and became very irritated. To see Weasley didn't have any problem like that, so she told him that he should follow what suited best. He also worked on his magic other times. He was becoming very adept at mind arts, and now he could pick up anyone's surface thought without even looking at their direction, if they were thinking very hard. So he decided to give it a try on the battle and frustrated Ray every time during their swords practice. She worked very hard but only to be beaten by a 5-year-old. She didn't know that she was broadcasting more in her frustration and he could predict her every move. So he easily dodged, parried or blocked, and on getting some opening attacked and moved out of her reach before she could react. The spectators became very impressed with his skills and they also tried mock duel with him only to lose miserably. So Weasley chased him down and ignoring the stick tackled him to the ground and tickled him mercilessly. Everyone on the group was convinced that He would become a formidable fighter once he grew up. He also knew what is expected of him. He knew when to go fetch some woods or do other small chores. He knew what to say to people and when to back off. And these were also helping in the growing respect for him. Despite his success on mind magic and rune work, Harry Potter became very frustrated because he couldn't do other branches of magic. He needed a wand to do that. So he set his main focus to it. He had to make his own wands after his Holy and Phoenix Feather wand destroyed during a battle. After rescuing Ollivander from the clutches of Voldemort, he taught them the sacred arts of wand making. The lessons proved extremely valuable during the war and saved their lives so many times to count. The main problem was the ingredients, the wood from a magical tree and a core from a magical creature. He knew how to make wands from blood, but they tend to be very volatile and would explode in his hand if he's not careful enough. He could collect wood from the godswood, and Weasley told him there are plenty beyond the wall. But where do you find magical animals? He thought. The answer came when he was discussing alternative to climbing or digging the wall. Why don't we go around the wall? He asked. Because it's spread as long as the land goes. But we can go through the water and cross the wall easily if we build a boat. He stated the obvious. No, we can't, Weasley argued. Why not? He challenged. We could from the east, but the crows always guard that area from the Eastwatch. Besides, the sea is very unsteady and no small boat can stand those huge waves. What about the west? He still wasn't ready to give up yet. He just didn't believe anything to be impenetrable. There is Shadow Tower, but no crow guard it anymore. And for good reasons. She was stalling him now and taking great pleasure in his rising ire. What reasons? He knew what she was doing but still felt agitated. The Dark Mountains, she said mysteriously. At his impatient look she added. It's higher than the wall and you have to land on the frozen shore through the Bay of Ice if you want to avoid it. What's wrong with that? Now he was truly interested. Bay of Ice is what the name says. It is always frozen. You can't sail through there. And if you somehow manage that, then there is the frozen shore. It leads to the only place, land of always winter. At his blank look she added, "There is always winter and no live thing can live there." She said living thing with a meaningful tone and he understood. "You can't go anywhere else from the frozen shore?" He asked. "You can, but you have to cross the dark mountains again and reach the haunted forest." He was processing these new information and mused aloud, "So if we want to avoid the wall, we have to go halfway through the world on a more dangerous path only to reach this haunted forest." He summarized. Exactly. She was happy that he understood. "Wait, what hunts the haunted forest?" He asked. "Many things. Giants, direwolves, trolls, mammoths, giant spiders, you name it." Suddenly he felt very excited. Now he knew where to find his wand core. If there was any place he could find a magical creature, it had to be that place. She did mention only dark creatures and he wasn't sure if they were magical or not, but it was worth a try, he decided. His intentions must have shown on his face because Idri was looking at him worriedly and asked, "You'll go there, won't you?" "I think so." He didn't see any point in denying that. "Just so you know, it is extremely dangerous in there. And no one goes there except when absolutely necessary." She didn't forbid him or anything and in a way told him to be cautious. This was one of the things he liked about the Wildings most. "You are a free man and you can do whatever you want. Nobody will stop you until it was their business." After 20 more days they could dig a tunnel just wide enough to pass one man. They packed everything valuable and one by one made their way through the tunnel to the other side of the wall. It was Harry's first time to this side of the wall and he tried to find out the differences between both sides but found none. It was exactly the same forest and lands they were traveling almost 2 months now. Except for the cold. It was to be expected though. They were more north and everyone knows that north was colder than south. Though Idri argued that her grandfather visited Fated Forest where he found a cave which was hot like summer. He mentally added that to his to-do list. They crossed the wall near an almost broken down tower abandoned by the Night's Watch named Icemark. Though this side of the wall was not guarded for centuries, they mostly made their way through the forest and avoided any higher area. It was hard work in the cold and snow and slow going. Harry and Idri was protected from the cold thanks to the rune work, but the others were not so lucky. Harry wanted to make all of the protected clothing, but he could manage that much without exhausting himself. They couldn't go for more than 6 hours due to lack of light and camped for the night. Harry saw a lot of trees with faces carved into it, but felt no pressure on his occlumency barrier. He mentally called for Brandon but no answer came. He guessed the Greenseer may be doing something else or maybe the Wildlings were not worth his time. He started wandering around the woods and Idri joined him soon. The Wildlings never restricted him from going anywhere, but there were always someone with him, mostly Idri. After crossing the wall they might allow him some alone time but saw that wasn't the case. He didn't like this lack of trust. Even after promising he won't run away they didn't heed him. He talked to Idri about it but she didn't support him in this too. The summary of what she said is, the Wildlings don't believe in promises. She said promises can be broken and he could do nothing about it. When he thought about it, he realized that she was right. It wasn't any magically binding oath that must be fulfilled or you lose your magic or life. All of it may be true but he didn't have to like it. "Came to guard me again?" he asked her sarcastically. "I'm not here to guard you," she defended. "These woods are dangerous, not only from animals, but also other people." He immediately felt guilty. She sounded a little hurt. He knew she wasn't there to guard him. With a bit of legitimacy he knew her feeling for him ages ago. She loved him like a little brother and loved to spend time with him. She will never admit it though, he thought. "Sorry," he said in a small voice. She didn't say anything to that but looked a little happier. There was a comfortable silence and they walked through the woods. They explored the area about half an hour. Then they were returning to the camp when he saw something strange. It was one of those trees that had face carved on it. It was strange because it was pure white in color, even leaves. He stopped walking. Idri saw what he was looking at and told him she had seen those trees before on this side of the wall but they were very rare. Harry was thinking about his wand when he saw the tree. He was trying to figure out some way to distract Idri and collect some woods for his wand. The Wildlings don't pray to any gods but they respect them, he thought. It won't be wise to cut some branches from a tree which some consider gods. What stopped him on the track wasn't the color of the tree. When he saw the tree he could feel the magic in it. He felt some trace of magic from other trees but not this strong. And he knew he had found the woods for his wand. He was so eager to collect some wood that he totally forgot he was not alone there. So he almost jumped to Igri's voice when she spoke about the tree. He stared at her some time, trying to figure out her reaction if he cut some branches from the tree. With a small mental probe he felt the respect she had for the tree. He considered come back later but immediately discarded the idea. It was already dark and he may not find the place again. And they always started walking before the daylight is fully up. According to Igri, these trees are extremely rare. So it is now or never, he thought. Do you mind if I stay here alone sometimes? He cautiously asked. He wanted her to make assumption that he wanted to pray here alone. But she knew him too well and looked at him suspiciously. But at his pleading look she just shrugged and left him alone. But he could see her in distance standing and trying to keep an eye on him. He thought it was the best he was going to get. Then he neared the tree cautiously and once again mentally called for Brandon. He didn't get any response and relaxed slightly. He thought about Brandon many times and couldn't reach any conclusion. So he was still a little wary about him. As he neared the tree he could more strongly feel the magic from it. It wasn't exactly like the magic in his dream life but it was mostly similar. But even in his dream life he never encountered any living being emit this amount of magic from it. He carefully observed the branches and found which would be more suitable for his wand. He selected some carefully cut about 2 feet from each branch with the small knife Igri gave him for curving runes. He looked back several times to keep her out of sight of his work. When he was done he peeled the leaves and smaller branches. Then tucked his newly acquired property securely under his robes and started walking towards Igri calmly. The whole thing took only 5 minutes. When he reached her she just looked at him curiously but didn't say anything. They walked the rest of the way silently. It was 2 days since they crossed the wall. They reached an odd place. Igri told him it is called Craster's Keep and owned by a man named Craster. She said the name with such disgust that he wondered what the man did to earn such hate. That he found out soon enough and wished he didn't know. There were only one man lived there with about 20 women and children of different age. The children were all female and he was surprised by the lack of male child. He couldn't help but feel disgusted and hate the man when he found out all the women there were both Caster's wives and children. The question about the male children remained, and when asked all he got for answer was, nobody knows and nobody cares. So he decided to put his special skill into use. What he found out both disgusted and horrified him. Craster was talking to Clawfoot when he started his legilimency attack from behind Clawfoot. He was so angry at the man that he forgone all his subtlety and attacked brutally without thinking of any consequences. He tore into his mind and extracted everything in it. Then he went through it and found out what he needed. It took about 2 minutes, and when he was done Craster slumped unconscious into his seat, blood pouring from his ears, nose, mouth and corner of his eyes. Despite the nature of the information he got, he felt satisfied at the fate of the man. His satisfaction was short-lived because he noticed the silence. All the people in the room were looking at him with different types of emotions. Most of them were angry, some of them with hope, and some were afraid. He understood hopeful looks because they were all pregnant. He also understood that they never seen anything like this and so felt afraid. But what he didn't understand was why they were so angry, as most of those looks were coming from Craster's wives' daughters. There was about 2 minutes silence, and one of the older-looking wife of Craster cried at him. "What have you done?" she bellowed. "I know what he was doing to you. So why are you angry at me? I have done you a service," he shouted. He was both angry and frustrated of their lack of gratitude. "Whatever he did, he saved us. Now we are all going to die," she wailed. At her words, the ones previously looking hopeful or pleased now looked afraid too. He started to retort angrily, but Igri interjected. "Craster was negotiating with us and the crows both and never refused anyone. So we all left him alone." Her explanations did nothing to calm him. He went to one pregnant-looking girl who looked almost 13 and pulled him to the center of the room forcefully. He resisted at first but then willingly came. Craster didn't deal with just you two. He said that, looking towards Clawfoot. Then asked the girl he brought, tell them. Everyone in the room was curious what she would say. So they kept quiet and they'd whisper, they could hear her clearly. He gives our boys to the others. There was more silence as everyone in the room was processing what she said. Then the room was in uproar. Everyone started to shout at the same time. Craster's wives were wailing in distress that the others will now claim them. Some were accusing the girl as liar. They were saying the others couldn't come this far south, though it was more a question than a statement. Some were silent, still processing the information. Clawfoot banged his warhammer on the table and it cleanly split in two. He got the desired effect though, the room silenced. Then he called all his men plus Harry together outside to what Harry guessed some kind of meeting. When they were outside and some distance away from the cabin, Clawfoot grabbed Harry by the collar and pulled him off his feet to get face to face. What did you do to him? He asked calmly, though Harry could feel his anxiety. No less than he deserves. He answered evenly, though his collar was slowly suffocating him. Now let me down, he demanded. Clawfoot then released him and he landed gracefully on his feet. He will live, but his mind has been destroyed. He explained at everyone's expectant look. How did you do it? Asked someone from the back fearfully. Magic. That seemed to shut them up, but he could see it didn't satisfy everyone's curiosity. He noticed this before. In his dream life, every time he did something unexpected and theoretically impossible, then told someone that he had done it by magic, and that shut everyone up. Then they discussed what they should do with the women and children. After a long debate they decided to offer them to go with them, and whoever chooses to stay can stay. Then Hay returned the cabin and told the residents of the place about their decision. About half of them decided to stay. Harry looked at whom wanted to come with them and noticed they were all the younger ones. So the next day they started their journey with 11 more people. The next 15 days' journey was almost the same to Harry except for one thing. Now he had a wand. One night he was practicing his daily occlumency exercise before going to sleep. Then the thought occurred to him. He knew how to make a wand with blood and the problems of blood wands. Those wands tend to explode when exposed to too much magic. So blood was only used to make the wand specifically keyed to only one person's use. He asked Ollivander about it and he said, blood is the best conductor of magic, but there was no wood capable of matching the power of blood, and that's why the woods of those wands explode. Now he had some special wood unlike he had ever seen before. He felt how much magic it was emitting. Can it withstand the power of blood? He wondered. It was worth the risk, he thought. So he started working on the wood immediately. And about an hour later he had a 10-inch long wood. It was pure white, in color like its tree, and after preparing for his wand it was now smooth and shiny. The next 2 hours passed in which he carefully carved the required runes onto it. Then he made a piece of stick, very thin and about the same length of the wand. Then he cut the wood for his wand in specific sites and inserted the newly formed stick into it. It was now ready for his blood. He pricked his finger deeply and squeezed blood out and soaked the runes thoroughly. After that he poured the runes carefully. The color of the wood changed into bright red and started to glow. Then he stabbed vein of his left hand and touched the protruding part of the stick to his wound. When the stick touched his wound, he immediately felt the drain in his blood. It drained a lot, more than the wand space could possibly hold, and when it stopped he felt a little lightheaded due to all the blood loss. He quickly bandaged his hand with some rags. It wasn't any conventional method of wand making. He learned it from Ollivander. The old wandmaker told him. It was all theoretical discussion because he had yet to find any suitable wood. So he didn't know if it worked. He very cautiously picked it up with a piece of cloth to inspect it for any visible fault, but found none. It was no longer the white wood it used to be. It was the same color of his skin, as if an extension of his arm. It looked perfect. So he gathered up his courage and grabbed the wand with his right hand and nearly dropped it in shock. There was a shower of different colors of sparks from the tip of the wand, much more than his first wand. He felt the wand hummed in acceptance. It felt very powerful and seemed very eager to do magic. He knew the moment he touched the wand that it will withstand any kind of magic he threw at it. How he knew that he didn't know. It was almost dawn but he didn't notice. After the primary shock of successfully making a wand passed, he immediately casted a lumos and the tent filled with a very bright light. After a quick knocks he waited to see if anyone noticed. Then he started casting all his first-year charms and found out he could do them easily, although he could feel that he was becoming very weak now. Maybe due to blood loss, he thought. Harry Potter went to sleep in very high spirit. He was on Ygritte's back for the next 2 weeks due to his enthusiasm about practicing magic. He told her about his wand and importance of it. After demonstrating a Wingardium Leviosa on her and a Featherlight charm on her things, she was very impressed. She asked if he could blast things or cut through the trees or kill someone instantly. He knew the wildlings were not savages like people of the North claim, but sometimes he wondered if that was true. Sometimes like this, they were very bloodthirsty and, if any solution is possible by fight, they never think for more solutions. So then he demonstrated a bombard on a nearby dead tree and a defindo on a branch for the entertainment of her and others who were looking. If they were impressed before, it was nothing compared to this. They practically worshipped him from then. He found out that he could easily do any first and second year spell. But ND that he always felt a little lightheaded after casting a spell. He could do some complicated spells which, despite being upper year, they were less draining. He was slowly improving though, and after 2 weeks of practice he now could do all his first and second year spells silently and some third year spells without exhausting himself. 2 more weeks later they reached Mance Rayder's camp. Mance Rayder was a big man. He looked about 40 and had long brown hair. His beard was also long and untamed like his hair, gave him a wild look. He was about 7 foot tall and there was something about him that made people respect him. It may be his piercing brown eyes which showed wisdom, or overall appearance, or commanding voice, or maybe all of these together. He was an impressive leader and he looked like a true wildling king. Harry mused. He thought what he knew about him. He was born a wildling. When he was young, he was captured by the Night's Watch and made to wear the black. He was with them about 25 years and recently left them. He now declared himself the king beyond the wall and collecting followers. And by the looks of it he got plenty. When the travelers reached the CAMP they were immediately escorted into the biggest tent. When they entered, Harry saw there were about 30 people already in there having some sort of discussion. Mance Rayder was angry at them at RST for fleeing, but then Clawfoot pushed Harry hard on the back and forced him to go forward. But we brought back a magician, he said hurriedly. Magician? Mance Rayder forgot about his anger and looked at Harry skeptically. Go on, boy, do your thing. Clawfoot nudged him on the back. Harry was already irritated by the man and decided to teach him a lesson. So he turned around and looked at him evilly. At his look, Clawfoot tried to back away and hide behind someone. But he already saw this coming and casted some spells at him very quickly. To the observers he just flicked his wand and there was a bang, and they looked at the place where Clawfoot was standing and found a real Clawfoot, about half his size. He didn't try human transfiguration yet, so he swayed slightly from exhaustion. A hand quickly steadied him from behind. He knew it was Ygritte without looking behind and squeezed her hand slightly in thanks. She just squeezed back. There was a silence following this display of magic. Then half of the room burst into laughing. The other half didn't know Clawfoot's name or had no sense of humor, he thought. After that he was easily accepted within them and got a place in Mance Rayder's tent. That night he was questioned by about 20 men and he told them what he already told the men he came with. He expected the questioning about him and his magic, but was a bit surprised when Mance Rayder asked him why he wanted to join them. So he repeated the story of his life, that he was orphaned when he was 1 and ran away from his abusive uncle. Now he wished to be free and wanted to fight the White Walker. Mance Rayder flinched at the name but seemed to be satisfied by his answer. After the Craster incident he thought everyone overlooked the question, how he knew those information about Craster. But he was mistaken. That night Ygritte confronted him about it and he had to tell her about his mind-reading ability. She wasn't pleased was an understatement. She was furious, not about any privacy stuff. She was furious because he used this ability to beat her in every dueling practice. He then requested her not to tell anyone, but she told him she'd think about it. He was wary at her evil look but forgot about it after some days. He thought she had forgiven him after all these days. But he was wrong. She told Mance Rider that he had the ability to tell if anyone was lying. So for the next 2 months he had to attend every meeting with Mance Rider and inform him who he should trust and who he shouldn't. Despite this, he was a little grateful that she didn't tell more details about his mind-reading ability. After that he joined Ygritte and 12 others who wished to return to their village. He told Mance Rider about his wish to go with Ygritte and to his surprise he didn't object. Later he found out he already ordered Ygritte to keep an eye on him all the time. He was used to this kind of behavior now and didn't mind much. He reached the village 15 days late, and he immediately loved it from his first sight. It was a small village. Harry could see about 50 houses. They were arranged in some defensive pattern, he recognized. The outer houses were smaller in size. The 2 sides of the village were guarded by mountain walls, one by a frozen river and one was open, he observed. The whole village was covered in white snow. There were small children eyeing on the snow and some people were seen wandering around. When they approached the village from the clearing a loud horn sounded. Immediately all the children seemed to vanish in thin air. Then about 50 men and women, all armed in different sort of weapons, came out from different houses and lined on the outer perimeter of the village. He was impressed on their reaction time but found some flaws on their defense. They were all standing together waiting for arrows to hit them, he thought. If they took cover behind different houses, the enemy will have a hard time infiltrating them. When Ey were still approaching he told Ygritte about his observations and she was impressed again. She told him she would talk about it to the village council. When they were close enough some of the villagers recognized many of their group and shouted something to the others. They immediately lowered their weapons and rushed forward to welcome them. Harry shook his head at their stupidity and took a mental note to point it out to them later. Harry followed Ygritte to her old house. They saw it was now claimed by some other people in her absence. But the man now staying here allowed them to stay with him. He could see the lust in his eyes when he looked Ygritte's direction. He made to warn her but stopped at the look of revulsion and hate in her eyes. He decided they can't live here long. The village life was more peaceful than with Mance Rider. He practically had to do nothing here. So he dedicated his times in improving his magical and physical skills. He made some new friends too. They were all slightly older than him but he was clearly the leader. They would follow him around and practice with him. They were all awestruck by his magical abilities and practically worshipped him. He was in the village about 6 months now and thought about building a new house. The tension in the old one was building steadily as their host was becoming more fearless. He was afraid of Harry after spying on him doing magic. Harry sensed him of course and intentionally demonstrated some very destructive and lethal magic. It still took out a lot from him but he had the desired effect, as he left him and Ygritte alone so far. He consulted with his new friends about building a new home as Ygritte was absent. She went on the hunt 2 days ago and didn't return. He wasn't worried though. It usually take about a week to get a decent prey. His new friends however were very excited to the prospect. Sobek asked if he wanted to build a magic home. Kuka asked if they could help. So he told them what he wanted. He had already selected a place near the back of the village, close to the frozen river. He led them there and told them he wanted to build a medium-sized house but there was not many woods they could use. He proposed them to carry them from the forest as he would cut them down. And to his delight they agreed. He transfigured a stone into a chainsaw. He could do this type of transfiguration now and transfigured some more. After he instructed how to use them and which trees to cut, they set to work. Harry really had to catch a breath and decided to just supervise for a while. It proved to be a good idea because they weren't used to working with these tools and making a big mess of it. So he corrected their grips, taught them how to make the trees fall to the side they wanted and remind them to rest after a while. He could see they were having a great time doing new things and felt something inside him. Whatever the feeling was he couldn't decide if it was a good or bad thing. He felt like he belonged here. Here he had friends, a sister and soon a home. He looked at them working together, laughing and having fun. He just felt something for them. He knew then and there that he would protect them with his life. That day they just cut the trees and left them in the forest. They tried to take the saws with them, but when Harry explained that, they'd vanish in another hour or two, they seemed more enthused to see it vanish before their eyes. He just shook his head in exasperation. The next day they worked on the land. The elders came to them that day and asked what they were doing. When he told them, he could clearly see their disbelief. After some demonstration of magic, they left them alone, muttering about crazy children. They had to dig very deep on the land and didn't have necessary tools. Harry wasn't used to this type of work and knew nothing about what tools required. So he had to do it by magic. He explained the problems to his friends and transfigured a pair of wheels on a sledge. It did wonders, as they could bring back half the trees that day. In this time he exhausted himself by digging 2 really deep holes on the hard frozen ground. He was very happy with the progress and couldn't wait for the next day. Next day passed exactly like the day before. The children brought the rest of the woods and he could dig 2 more holes. The next day he managed to dig 3 holes, and in the meantime the others cut the woods in appropriate sizes in Harry's direction. The next 2 days passed as Harry dug 5 more holes and the others brought stones of different sizes from the hills. They all waited in anticipation for the next day, because they'll do the real building then. Harry had dug 12 holes total. There were 12 logs of trees prail work as the base of the house. He slowly levitated one by one and placed them into the holes. It was very hard work due to the size of the logs. It took about an hour in total, but he had to rest for the next hour. He charmed the holes to be impenetrable before, so they remained that way. He lifted the charm before placing the logs. Almost the whole village was there to see what they were doing and impressed at the progress. The next bit of work was only Harry's. He just levitated the collected stones around and in between the logs and made an uneven and unsteady mess. Then he transfigured them into a firm and smooth platform. Transfiguring stones were the hardest thing he had done by far, and his mistake was that he tried to do this in one go. He just put as much effort as he could, and after he finished he found himself on his own bed. He opened his eyes to find an irate Weasley looking at him. He couldn't remember what he had done now, so he wisely kept his mouth shut. He remembered soon enough, when she started shouting at him about his stupidities and why he couldn't wait some days and start after she came back. Later, after she calmed down, he found out that he was unconscious for 3 days. And the people of the village finished the walls of his new home under Weasley's supervision in this time. He couldn't wait to see how it looked. It was almost noon, and after a quick meal he sprinted to the location of his home. He was pleased to find out it was almost finished and some men were finishing the roof now. He had plans for the roof and the walls, but that'll also do, he thought. And his friends were sulking nearby and sending nasty looks at the working men. He understood their sentiments perfectly. They wanted to finish the work themselves. When they saw him coming, they immediately cheered up and flooded him with complaints. He calmed them down and watched them working. Their work was complete next day, and now he could go on with his next plan. It took a full month, but when he was finished, the look of the house completely changed. It was snow white now, exactly the color of the snow that was now covering the village. Its walls were very smooth to touch, and it looked so beautiful that the whole village assembled to just stare at it in awe. What they couldn't see was its special features. The walls were now indestructible and had fire and water repellent runes on it. It also had runes against all kind of insects and parasites. And its doors and windows had anti-trespassing runes on it. He also added these features to the roof and added a ladder to the attic, which was clearly absent before. Then the villagers started to enter the house to see inside. They were pleasantly surprised to find out it was comfortably warm. He added these special runes that will keep a constant temperature despite the weather. The stone floor was hard and cold but very smooth. There was a fireplace at the entrance hall which was empty for now. There were also some comfortable-looking armchairs and tables there. They found 3 big bedrooms of about the same size and had the same furniture: a large single bed, a closet, a chair and a table, and an extra door for the bathroom. He craved runes to vanish the contents of the toilet. The kitchen was also impressive. Besides the normal cooking instruments, it had also a big dining table, which impressed most of them. There were also 2 storerooms and a basement. The doors to these rooms were hidden so they didn't get to look at them. But he showed them to Weasley and his other friends, as they did a lot of works here and deserved to know. The both storerooms were extremely cold, more than outside. He explained to them that it can be used in the summer. The basement was a big empty room. They can find its use later. So RRY and Egri moved into their new home next day. Egri wasn't comfortable at it at first, but then he told her that he had built it just for her. It was the first time he saw her cry. She stared at him for a long time and processing what he said, then silent tears started to flow from her eyes. After that she enveloped him with such fierce hug that he couldn't breathe. She didn't show her emotion towards him easily before, but after they moved into the new home she became the perfect big sister. 5 years had passed after that. It was his first ever uninterrupted happy life. And now he had a real family too, he thought happily. And the next chapter will contain about Harry's meeting with Jon Snow and some happenings in Westeros. Please R&R. Pairing. There will be pairing, but I didn't think about it yet. Harry was too young then. But now I need some serious thinking. Any suggestion will be really appreciated. Chapter 5. The 2nd of April 2017. This story is most likely going to be abandoned. If anyone wished to adopt it, you are welcome. The original story has progressed very much and I like to see what happens in canon, then think about writing this story again. Thank you for reading. The Stranger. As for your concern about Harry submitting to kidnappers, he could do nothing about it. He was injured at that time and didn't have access to his magic. He did at first, but I have rewritten to change that. He always craved for his family and felt much betrayed by it. So he wasn't thinking straight. And when he was capable of escaping from the people who think might is right, he became very attached to them and didn't want to think about that cursed family anymore. Fanfic freak. I want to avoid any more rewrite for now. Thanks for the suggestion. I'll keep that in mind if I can't adjust. Pairing. Most of you wanted Arya to be paired with Harry. I see no problem with that. Should be fun playing with them. No. Disclaimer. It doesn't matter how much I wish, but I still don't own Harry Potter and Game of Thrones. Chapter 5. Today is Harry Potter's 12th birthday. But there was no cake, no party, no celebration or tourney like he used to have in King's Landing. The lack of celebration wasn't due to any ignorance. It was simply because the wildlings don't celebrate birthdays. They don't think it is as important as someone's first kill or hunting something significant, which always means big. They treat you as adult if you act like one, like you can provide food for yourself and protect yourself from the enemy. He found out soon enough that the wildling children mainly grow up on their own. Their parents teach them how to fight and hunt. They'd take their children with them during hunting so that they could see and learn firsthand. As for the fighting, they learned from their parents if they were lucky. Most of them weren't lucky to have both their parents alive, and some only had a spear wife for a mother. And less got to learn how to fight from them. So they practiced on their own. Harry quickly adapted to the life and practiced with them. He didn't use legilimency during fight anymore. He didn't want to be dependent on that. Having an edge on a fight was OD, but he didn't like the idea of depending on something entirely. It was unlikely that he would have to face someone whose mind is protected in this world but isn't worth the risk, he decided. He was already at a disadvantage due to his use of mind magic too much and had to work very hard to cover it. He had the complete memory of his dream life and the education he had there. He was assorted into Gryffindor House and befriended Ronald Weasley and Hermione Granger in his first year. He wasn't very studious and barely passed thanks to Hermione. But that changed after his meeting with Voldemort. He wanted to be prepared for the inevitable return of Voldemort. He was only second to Hermione in some subjects after that and became the top student of their year. At first his friendship with Ron was greatly affected by that, but he eventually came around. Studying and researching became his habit there and wanted to continue that here too. But he didn't have anything to study here or there and much information that he could research. He wasn't idle though. He decided to write down everything he could remember from his dream life. Transfiguring now as he mastered permanent transfiguration in the next year after his moving on to the new home. He wrote books about different subjects, separately as best he could remember, and his life story is some kind of biography. He also wrote some of the children's story books from the memory of both his lives. He was finished all these writing last year. Writing became his habit then, so he was writing journals about his real life from then. When he started writing, Idri asked what he was doing. So he taught her how to write and read. The problem was, there wasn't any book in the village, so he had to do a lot of hard work. He also tried to teach his friends, but that was a disaster. At first everyone was interested to learn new things. But after a week there were only 3 students left, including Idri. She wasn't interested at first but when he told her about sending massages by ravens, she was highly impressed and didn't object again. The other 2 was Kuka and Sobeg. He had grown quite attached to them and they stayed at first just for their friendship's sake. He gave the story books to his students for some reading practice and they quite liked that. He mastered some more magic in these years. The most useful one was apparition and portkey creation. Now he could apparate to any locations or use portkey if the distance was too much to apparate. So he was all over the wildling territory. He explored even within the Ntd forest and had some friendly chat with some giants. Unlike his dream life, they were actually quite intelligent and less aggressive. He didn't go beyond that at Idri's insistence. She warned him that the others lived there. Of course he didn't take her words for it and narrowly avoided being killed by the White Walkers. The rumors were actually true and they existed. But his initial assumption about them was far from truth. He already knew about their existence after hearing Idri's story about seeing them. He believed her, but she refused to tell him where she had seen it. He wouldn't read her mind because he promised he wouldn't do it without her permission. Unlike most of the wildlings, he still valued his promises greatly. But unfortunately she knew that too. He thought the White Walkers were like infairies. Some mindless, slow-moving things should be easy enough to kill. Imagine his surprise when he apparated to the farthest border of the hunted forest and found himself surrounded by them. Sensing the danger, he apparated 100 feet away from them immediately. But they sensed him instantly and ran towards him in inhuman speed. So he apparated again and casted an incendio to one and burned it to ashes. Then the most unthinkable happened. All of them suddenly stopped and seemed to think for a moment. Then they scattered away from one another and tried to flank him. They had their weapons drawn now and actually dodged his second spell. By then he just freaked out and apparated as far as he could, then not wasting a second, made a portkey and fled. He didn't return to that area again. He visited other wildling villages at regular basis and became a very familiar and popular figure on most of them. He also regularly visited Mance Rider and kept track of the war about to happen between the Night's Watch and the wildling. He didn't like the idea of a war between them but could do nothing about it. He discovered that he could not apparate to the other side of the wall or portkey there. There was some kind of highly concentrated magic on the wall that prevented any kind of magical transportation across it. If he wanted any negotiation between them, he had to either climb it manually or go around it or dig another tunnel. He tried to talk with some rangers, but they were very violent against the wildlings. He didn't want to provoke the upcoming war any further. He was sympathized with the wildlings in this but could understand the Night's Watch's position. The wildlings wanted to keep the wall between them and the White Walkers when winter comes. Night's Watch swore an oath not to allow anything to cross the wall. However impossible it seems, he had to do something about it soon enough, he thought grimly. He did all he could for his village in these years. He craved runes to keep every house of the village warm and warded against any potential enemy. It was an intent-based ward and anyone with malicious intent towards them won't be able to come closer to it. He didn't know about any wards that would keep the White Walkers away. He just hoped the intent-based wards would be enough but wasn't very confident about it. He warded the other friendly villages with the same wards anyway and hoped for the best. At least it would keep them safe from the enemy tribes, he thought. He also found out that most of the wildlings didn't have any decent weapons. Those who had were stolen from someone north. The weapons were actually good for killing, hunting and other stuff, but wasn't any match for the castle-forged weapons the southerners use. Of course he could make them even better than castle-forged swords, but suddenly didn't like the idea after seeing Sobeg's reaction to his first conjured sword. They weren't bloodthirsty, but it was Lee K giving out elder wands to every wizards and witches. He just shuddered to think what it would do to some already big-mouthed and violent people. Even good people had found it hard not to boast about something like that. He wanted to research more about the White Walkers but couldn't find any information except the rumors that how terrifyingly scary they were. He searched for any book at all in all the likely places but found none. He thought that Grand Maester Pycelle's library must have something about this. He also heard from Mance Rayder that the Castle Black had a very big collection of books and scrolls. Some of them were really old and nobody actually read them. His plan was to infiltrate that library first after he completed his newest project. He was currently working on Animagus transformation. He couldn't make the necessary potions due to lack of the ingredients. So he had to it old-fashioned way. He meditated for 2 years to find his inner animal. Then it was all about practice. He was practicing for almost a year now and almost completed it. He learned to transform all the body parts separately and all that remained was, he had to try to do all of it at once. He promised Ygritte and Val that he would do that in front of them for the first time, so he was waiting for Ygritte to return from the hunt. She didn't need to go hunting as he could do that very easily with the LP of magic, but she always insisted on going. She was gone over a month now and he was starting to worry. She had an emergency portkey with her and could return to the village if her life was in any danger. But being non-magical, she couldn't activate the portkey with any keyword. It'd work only if she was badly injured, so he hoped she didn't need to use it. In these years he became very adapted to magic and now he could do almost everything he could in his dream life. He didn't have the same level of magical power developed yet, but he was physically stronger than he was ever before. It may be due to any lack of malnutrition like in his dreams. His constant practice of fighting without magic also helped. He could defeat anyone of his age and most of the others who were even older than him. For some reason he couldn't defeat Ygritte without magic and she was always very smug about it. He was tall for his age now and had a very strong build. He didn't know this, but he looked like his father Robert when he hadn't gone all fat. He looked almost 14 now and attracted a lot of female attentions. He didn't get the chance to have any girlfriend in his dream life due to the war. He dated Ginny Weasley for a brief period of time, but that was it. After her death he didn't think about it much, so he was very unaware of the attentions he was getting. Ygritte wasn't helping any and she just laughed at his thickness. He wanted to confront her. What was that all about when he came back? He thought that they might fancy, immediately discarded the idea. He was only 12 and therefore too young for dating. He was blissfully unaware of his older and handsome looks, so didn't have a clue of the sudden interests of the girls for him. At least Val wasn't acting weird, he thought fondly. He met Val when he was visiting Mance Rayder 2 years ago. He was leaving but decided to visit a nearby village. He heard about this village but didn't have the chance to visit it yet. It was slightly larger than his own but strategically weaker. Thanks to him, his village was nothing short of a fortress now, and he was confident that they could hold off a small army long enough and without the wards. Upon entering the village he noticed some children were practicing sword fighting in some distance and approached them. He was very amazed at the speed and ferocity of a girl who easily defeated 3 opponents at once. They stopped fighting when saw him and looked at him curiously. Of course his reputation about being able to do magic was spread all over the wildling population by then, and were very excited to see some magic after he introduced himself. He showed them some as he did whenever he had the chance. Ygritte often teased him about being a show-off, but he couldn't help it. He loved the looks of wonder and fascination in their faces. In his dream world people weren't this accepted to magic, and he could vividly remember his nickname, the Freak. He noticed the girl who was Ightting3 at once, keeping some distance from others. She looked about 13 and was one of the prettiest girl he had ever seen. He approached her and unnecessarily introduced himself again. She told him her name was Val. He visited that village many times after that, even when he didn't have any scheduled meeting with Mance Rayder. His friendship with Val was limited to greetings first. She was as interested in his magic like any other children but didn't show any of it. She was very guarded at first for some strange reason, but eventually opened up to him. He found out the reason soon enough, though, and couldn't help but sympathized with her conditions. It was not very unlike his own when he lived with the Dursleys, minus the abuse part. Her father died before she was born and her mother died during giving birth to her. Her mother was very popular in their village, so she was immediately declared as cursed and the villagers accused her for being responsible for her parents' death. She grew up with her sister alone and recently been allowed to associate with the others due to her sister's relationship with Mance Rayder. After they became friends, they often passed their time by swords, fighting or exploring the forest or hunting together. He wasn't any match for her at fighting at first but improved very quickly. Now he could defeat her at least once out of 3 times. He didn't tell anyone except Igri about his dreams and for some reason didn't tell her either. He tried to tell her but always decided against it at the last moments. She became a very good friend and didn't court like the other girls around him, and for that he was very thankful. He was afraid what she might think if he tell her about his dreams. He knew it was very illogical and pointless, but there was always the feeling of insecurity. He was determined that, the next time he will tell her about it. Harold Baratheon and Cersei was his mother. He didn't tell anyone about one last secret and wasn't very inclined to do so in the recent future. He was actually the youngest prince of the Seven Kingdom. He didn't tell anyone because he didn't actually believe it anymore. He was not Harold Baratheon anymore. Cersei was not his mother. He was Harry Potter. He sometimes argued with himself, but deep down he knew the truth and didn't like it one bit. Igri was in trouble. She was hunting alone and came very far away from the village. Animals were very hard to find these days as the winter was coming closer. She was now very carefully approaching a stag and once again thought about her brother Harry. Shish. E was amazed to see him hunting with magic and couldn't help but feel all her skills useless. He just vanished in thin air with an almost inaudible crack after seeing the prey, then reappeared instantly just in front of it. Then the rest of the work was too easy. She loved hunting very much and always insisted doing it old-fashioned way. She loved the thrill of stalking the unaware prey and sinking her arrow in it. Most of the times the prey won't die easily after the first shot if it was big enough and she had to track it down by the trail of its blood. She loved this part too. She was almost within the shooting range, then the stag snapped its head high and vanished from sight in an instant. She cursed her luck. It was a big one, actually one of the biggest she had ever seen. She was about to come out of the bush she was hiding under, then she heard that sounds of hooves, and many of them, so that alerted the stag, she thought. The sound was coming closer and she waited to see what it was. She was very surprised by the sight. She didn't expect to see so many crows this far north. She was about to follow them, but suddenly her world went black. She wasn't careful enough and didn't notice the crow sneaking on behind her and knocked her unconscious from the back. She woke up at the intense stinging on her cheek. Someone must have slapped her to wake her up, she thought. Then she noticed the cold she was feeling on the back for lying on the cold ground. She tried to stand up but was unsuccessful due to her bound hands and legs. She then stopped struggling and laid still on the frozen ground resignedly. Then the crows started asking her questions. Questions about Mance Rayder. She laughed openly at their stupidity. Did they really think they could capture the king beyond the wall with about 20 men? She told them that and laughed again at their uncomfortable expressions. One of them angrily suggested to kill her for her uselessness and others inclined to agree. The leader appointed the task to a young man and left the two of them alone to finish the job. Don't take too long, Snow. One of the crow winked at him suggestively and was the last to leave them. She closed her eyes, waiting for the sword to come. She thought resignedly about the uselessness of the necklace Harry had given her. She won't be seriously injured now but dead instantly. And nothing could raise the dead, even not with the miraculous healing magic of Harry's. She was waiting for the blade to claim her life and waited and waited. The pain she expected never came. She opened her eyes and saw He Crow swung his sword at her but it missed. She looked at him disbelievingly as he cut her loose and joined the others without a backwards glance. She came out of her stupor quickly enough and immediately started towards the last known location of Mance Rayder. She reached the camp 6 days later and relieved to find him there. She told him all about her encounter with the crows. She was wondering for a while why the crows wanted him so badly. From their attitude she didn't think it was because of him being the leader of the enemy. They seemed to hate him personally. Mance Rayder was thinking the course of action when she voiced her question. He laughed at the question and told her the reason. He was a crow before and knew all about them. Their manpower, strategy, weapons, territory, all of it. And they were not happy about a wildling knowing all those vital information. Then she joined the raid to hunt down the crows who dared to come this far north of the wall. Harry was really worried now. Wigry was gone for 2 months. Sometimes she took almost a month but never this late. Something must have happened. He was once again exploring the hunted forest for the last month for the warm cave Wigry told him about but had no luck so far. It had to be somewhere near the dark mountain, he thought resignedly at last, just like many times before when he admitted defeat. He was very careful these days because the White Walkers were seen more frequently on the outer border of the hunted Foresees returned twice every day but she never came. He forgot to visit Val for some time due to his worry and decided a visit was in order. He once again portkeyed to his village to check if Wigry returned, then apparated to Val's village directly. He found her sitting alone on a tree root just outside the village. She saw him approaching but didn't show any reaction. Sorry I couldn't come earlier but I was worried about Wigry. She didn't return from hunting for 2 months now. He told her. But she's never this late. Is she all right? She exclaimed concernedly, earlier anger forgotten. She never had a friend before and due to her relation with Mance Rayder people seemed more afraid of her. So shish. He was quite attached to her only friend and his sister. She was angry at first for not visiting her. But now she thought about it, her own sister's visit was also due yesterday. She told Harry about it and he voiced his concern about her too. Then he proposed her to visit Mance Rayder for any news and she happily agreed. He apparated them both directly to the camp. She didn't like the feeling of a long apparition but got used to it by now. They were surprised to find the camp in utter chaos. It looked like they just returned from a war. They quickly moved in between the soldiers and their scattered possessions towards the biggest tent. They didn't have to go that far as they attracted by large gatherings. Harry froze to see only one prisoner bound and being questioned by Mance Rayder himself. It wasn't an unusual scene but he was surprised by the identity of the prisoner. He had a very good memory and instantly recognized the bastard son of Lord Eddard Stark. He remembered his name as well, Jon Snow. He loudly exclaimed. Val quickly regained her composure after the familiar feeling of disorientation. She was just as surprised to see how busy the camp was and quickly followed Harry. He was still holding her hand and they squeezed between the gathering crowds and scanned for her sister first. She was standing behind Mance Rayder and was about to run towards her but forced to stop. Harry was frozen in place and staring at the prisoner in shock. She was more surprised to hear him exclaim, Jon Snow. From the looks of it the prisoner was trying to convince Mance Rayder about something, then he suddenly stopped and looked at Harry. Val saw the confusion on his eyes, then recognition and at last shock. He was clearly as shocked as Harry and was about to say something but Harry loudly interrupted, Stop. Just the man I need right now, Mance Rayder said happily after seeing Harry. Harry looked at him for the first time and saw Wigry standing beside him. Val saw fear in his eyes at first when he interrupted the crow, then immediately replaced by relief and anger after seeing his sister. He made to say something but was interrupted by Mance Rayder. Harry, wanted to kill this man but Wigry said he wants to join us. I can't decide whether to believe him or not, he said suggestively. Harry, the prisoner muttered confusedly. He was thinking something furiously. Apparently Harry was thinking furiously too. Jon almost blurted out his real name in public. He was sure that Mance Rayder knew all about the 7 kingdoms and would recognize the name instantly. At least his last name, he thought. He couldn't allow his name to be exposed. It wouldn't make any difference to most of the wildlings but he also didn't care much about them either. Those who tread to him would definitely get hurt by the lies he told them. Jon seemed to draw on the same conclusions and had a very different reaction. He understood that Harold must be here by his own free will and wanted to remain here. He didn't told the wildlings his real name for some reason and wanted it to remain the same way. The thought about all the happenings in the 7 kingdoms and the sufferings and loss of his family. All could be avoided if he returned. He heard the prince was asking Mance to question him privately and broke out of his thought. He clearly understood his intentions to silence him maybe permanently and screamed desperately. Harold Baratheon, my prince. He couldn't go any further as his ability to speak suddenly stopped. Harry was talking to Mance, then heard John screamed his real name. He fired a silencing charm at him quickly. But it was too late. There was a silence around the crowd as everyone clearly heard him. Most of them didn't have any idea of the meaning of his name, but they were confused about the prince part. Harry wasn't looking at them as he had only eyes for the people he cared most. He saw confusion on Val's eyes and then hurt. She knew he didn't tell her everything and wasn't very surprised, but still felt hurt that he didn't tell her even his real name. Then he looked at the amused expression of Mance Rayder's face. The man had a twisted sense of humor and he wasn't very surprised at his reaction either. He was afraid to look at Ygritte and saw what he feared most. Without any legitimacy probe, he could feel what she was thinking. She thought he trusted her as she did him and kept no secret from him. She wasn't in any way concerned about him being a prince. She was hurt that he kept lying to her, which sounded so real at the time. Even now she couldn't believe that all he told her was just lies. She knew who Robert Baratheon was, like everyone who went south of the wall, and felt betrayed for the lack of trust. He opened his mouth to say something but closed again. He was at loss for words. He thought furiously what he could do to make things right again. He briefly thought about obliviating everyone but immediately discarded the idea. He would never do that to a friend. In all the confusion, the silencing charm must have wear off because John spoke again. "Please come back to us, Prince. Come back where you belong. You could end this bloody war." What war? He was confused now. All he knew, the war hadn't started yet, and it was not that bloody like John was suggesting. You don't know. John was confused now. He thought about it and it made sense to him. Of course you don't, he muttered. Harry was getting angry now for the lack of information. He was already worried about Ygritte's reaction and couldn't decide any course of action. John had to blurt out this, he thought angrily, and now he was stalling instead of answering him straightly. He swiftly entered his mind completely and searched for what he wasn't telling him. It wasn't hard because he seemed to be thinking about them right now. After seeing in his mind he wished he didn't know. He saw John being summoned by Master Aemon many times and read the letters from Robb Stark, Lady Catelyn, Master Llewellyn and many others bringing news about the happenings of the Seven Kingdoms. He also saw some conversations with new recruits. As he read the letters and heard the news, he felt the dread growing in him. He could easily fill in the blanks as what he saw through his mother's eyes. Now he knew how she was, but still what he saw beyond shocked him. He didn't suspect once for the legitimacy of the news. He knew it was Cersei who sent a killer to a sick boy to hide her dirty little secrets. Then his father's death. He suspected there was more to it than meet the eyes. Then killing Lord Stark in public for treason of all things. How stupid people were. But starting a war for her personal gain and hatred, was it really worth it? He thought in distress. He knew she was evil but had no idea about the extent she could go to have her way. Deny all he wanted, but he knew she was her mother and only she was responsible for all the misery of so many people. Ey was feeling hurt that Harry could lie to her about so many things. After losing her parents, she was all alone in the world. She always felt an emptiness after that. But after meeting Harry, she found a new family. She got the little brother she always wanted. She was happy again and had new purpose of life. But now she realized he didn't even told her his real name. He told her so many lies and she believed it all. It looked like he was a very good liar and even BGHT bitterly. She didn't care about him being a prince at all. She wasn't even sure why she was feeling so hurt. Like she cared about anything she was hearing now. She was as confused as Harry when Jon Snow, the man spared her life, spoke about some bloody war. Then she recognized the signs of Harry reading his mind, as both of them stared at each other and none of them was blinking. What she saw next really broke her heart. She forgot about everything else as she saw in horror. Harry suddenly sunk on his knees, then covered his face with both of his hands. After that he fell to the ground face forwards, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. In the last 7 years she knew Harry, she never saw him displaying any tiny sign of weakness even in private. She still cared about him very much, and seeing him sobbing in front of everyone she forgot all her anger instantly. She ran towards him and forcefully pulled him from the ground to cover him with a hug. Instead of being reassured, he sobbed even harder. She didn't say anything, and with the help of Val almost carried him towards a nearby tent. Earlier she tried to spare the crow's life. But he must have done something to hurt Harry so much. She'll deal with him later. And not very kindly like she intended at first, she thought with a dangerous gleam on her eyes. John was just looking at the breakdown in confusion, and after he was carried away he wondered aloud, so he knew everything after all. That seemed to break everyone out of their stupor. Val grew up being ridiculed by others for being evil or some bad luck. She didn't want to show them that they hurt them, so she never showed them any emotion. She became cold and distant. She hated those who had no emotional strength. Those who are strong never shows their emotions, her sister used to say to her when she was younger. So she was very surprised at her current feelings. Anger. And it wasn't even direct. Ted to Harry, who broke down crying in front of everyone. It was for the crow, who was clearly responsible for this. How could she hate the only real friend she had? She thought as she looked at him sleeping peacefully at Ygritte's lap. Dried tear marks still on his cheeks. She knew he was not weak in any way. And that crow will pay for this, she thought viciously. Mance Rayder was really concerned. He found it harmonious that his wizard was actually a prince of the Seven Kingdom. He wasn't concerned about him being on the enemy team. If he wanted to leave them, then he could do it years ago. He was a wildling and a free man to heart. He knew about his mind-reading ability now and was waiting for him to spill all the dirty little secrets of the crow. But he wasn't expecting him to break down crying. What did the crow do? He must have done something, he thought furiously. Maybe the crow is more than he looks. He quite liked the kid and felt angry at the crow for what he did. But he didn't do anything to him for now. He will talk to Harry and then decide the fate of the crow. Jon Snow knew he was in trouble. It was all his fault actually. He was the one who couldn't kill the wildling and let her go. What good that did to him? Got 3 of his brothers killed and got himself captured. After that, all the excitement with the prince business. What he first noticed in the boy after hearing his name was the eyes. Lannister green eyes. Then looked for blonde hair but saw the black mess. He instantly made connection to King Robert. Then he remembered about the lost prince when he joined the Night's Watch. The boy looked slightly older, but could it be? He wondered. But how he knew his name then? He remembered too well that they talked once when he was in Winterfell. He was asking why he wasn't in the feast before, and he was desperately trying to avoid the awkward subject. But what he couldn't understand was why the boy suddenly broke down. He did know of what the Lannisters did before, then why this act now? And there was something else wrong. After that they removed the prince, all the wildlings gone quiet. They were shouting for his blood before but waiting for their leader's decision. Now they had their weapons drawn and slowly advancing him, leader forgotten. Did he do something? He thought desperately. Whatever they thought he did, he had to convince them that he didn't do it. But they didn't seem in any condition to see reasons. Then Mance Rayder stepped in and saved him for now. He could see the man wasn't happy about saving him but did it for some reason anyway. He had to speak with the prince. He seemed to carry some authority in the wildlings and was his only chance. Harry slept through that day and all night. When he woke up, he was on an unfamiliar bed. He was trying to think how he got here, then he remembered. He silently sat on his bed thinking what to do. Jon was right. He could end this bloody war. He knew it was highly possible that both his brothers and his sister were not the king's children. But there was no doubt he was the son of the king, for the obvious resemblance he saw in Jon's eyes. He knew Lord Stark was an honorable man but must have forced to confess the crime he didn't do. His daughters were with him in the King's Landing after all. When he thought about Bran and Rickon, a single tear tracked down his eye. Somehow their death must be connected to his mother, he thought. Then he thought about Arya. Is she alive? Or she was also dead like her brothers and lying in some unnamed grave? It was most likely the latter, he thought miserably. What he could do? Kill his own mother and brother. He knew his brother was equally guilty of some of the crimes. Then what? Claim the Seven Kingdom? What about Tommen and Myrcella? What to do with them? He knew it would probably solve some of the problems, but he also knew he couldn't do it. For the first time in his life he wished there was someone make the decisions for him. If that someone was Dumbledore, then be it. He thought resignedly. He had his hands on his head and thinking desperately, then someone gently placed a hand on his shoulder. He looked up and saw it was Ygritte. He could tell she wasn't angry at him anymore. He could also see Val was standing on the doorway looking at him, concern written on her face. He couldn't help it. He just laughed. And laughed he did. He uproariously until he couldn't breathe anymore. In his dream life his greatest wish was to have a family, any family at all. But he actually had a family. Father, mother, brothers and a sister. But most of them turned out so evil-minded that he had to escape from them and found friends and family who actually loved him and cared about him. And now the real family he abandoned was still hunting him so far away. Why couldn't he catch a breath? Why fate was so cruel at him? He found it all horrendous. He saw Ygritte and Val both were looking at him like he was insane. Maybe he was insane right now, he thought. Ygritte asked gently if he wanted to talk about what happened. He knew they deserved to know the whole truth now but didn't want to talk about it more than once. So after Mance Rayder and his wife joined them he told them everything, holding nothing back. About 2 hours later when he was finished Val had him in a tight hug. Ygritte was holding his hand comfortingly and Mance Rayder was thinking something. Ygritte knew most of it but didn't interrupt him. She could see he was relaxing by unloading everything he had suppressed for so long. What do you want to do now? Mance got straight to the point. I don't know. I don't want anything to do with them. They are nobody to me. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself. I can see that, Mance said with a snort. What can I do? Maybe they are still my family but I am responsible for any of this. Why should I clear the mess they made? He shot back angrily. Are you sure? Think boy, if you didn't run away from them and told your father the truth then all of this wouldn't happen. Mance said slyly. Who would believe a 5-year-old over the queen? And father would have killed them all if somehow I could convince him. He answered frustratingly. So you still was not a question. No I don't. He said heatedly. Then you ran away from your problem like a coward. Enough. Ygritte and Val both stood up angrily, glaring at the king beyond the wall. But he wasn't angry at all. He had a satisfied smile on his face. Harry was now desperate to change the subject. What should I do now? He asked no one in general. You should forget about it like it never happened. Val quickly answered. She was afraid he would go away from them to those awful people. She was quite relieved to see the approving nod from Ygritte. But she was short-lived because Mance Rayder spoke again. You can't forget things just like that. He obviously didn't know about Obliviation Charm, Harry thought. What do you propose then? He asked. He was truly curious about what solution Mance was thinking. He knew he was a very cunning man. Maybe he had a good solution after all. You go to the King's Landing and make things right. There was a silence in the room. It stretched for a long minute then the females of the tent exploded in angry protests. Mance Rayder was just holding a hand in front of him, signaling them to stop. I'm not finished yet. He won't be able to live peacefully if he didn't do anything. I know it. I was on the other side as well. I was quite happy with the life of a crow. At their disbelieving faces he chuckled. Yes I was happy. I was a kid when I was taken by them and grew up with them. Maybe they manipulated me to like them but the truth is I liked it with them. It was like having a very big family. They will always look out for their brothers no matter what. So what changed? Harry asked. He heard about the stories but it was the first time he was hearing it directly from him. That dead things happened. Oh I know what that you did to Craster Harry and believe me I am very happy about it. I wanted to kill him long ago but he was providing important information. But the main reason was the crows were protecting them. At their disbelieving looks he laughed again. Oh yes, I was curious what happened to Craster's boys as well. One day we were staying there for the night and a pregnant girl was about to deliver her baby. It was a boy and after the boy was born I saw Craster took him and went outside. So I followed him. What I saw I won't forget for the rest of my life. He shuddered. Everyone else in the room knew about this and they were all horrified by the truth even now. He continued. I confronted the Lord Commander about it but found out he already knew about it. I knew about the stories about the others, and also knew the winter was coming. I did what had to do then. If we can't get to the safety of the wall we'll all die and become those things. The more people in this side of the wall means the more of them. There was a long silence after this. What's it to do with Harry? Val asked at last. It was the question everyone was thinking about. I know he can help us fight, but he is just one man. Maybe he can make a difference here, but he can also make a difference on the other side as well. If he can convince them about the real danger, then this war may also be avoided. So that was the real reason, Harry thought. He was a little puzzled about Mance Rayder's suggestions. He obviously didn't realize the full extent of his power, but knew enough to not let him go. He was a huge advantage for any side, but he was just one man. It was true actually. He firsthand saw what those things could do and knew he wouldn't be enough if they attack all out. He may save himself and some people with him even then, but the rest of them will die and add to the enemy. Mance Rayder was right, he thought again. It was a war between the livings and the dead. And if they can avoid a war or two between the livings, then they have a good chance of winning. His respect for the man grew more. He realized that he had to go, even if he didn't like it. For the greater good, he mentally scoffed. At least he wasn't sacrificing someone else for it, he tried to reason with himself. He didn't like his old headmaster for what he did to him for the greater good, but here he was doing that to himself. Sacrificing his own happiness for the other people. Maybe it was his saving people thing, like Hermione used to say. He looked at Igri and Val. They were waiting for his response anxiously. He could see that they didn't want him to go. They wanted him to stay with them no matter what. But when did he care about that? He had some of his friends left in his dream world, but Willie NGLY sacrificed himself without even a farewell. So he told them of his wish. Both of them begged him to stay. He tried to reason with them, but they weren't willing to listen any reason. When they understood he wasn't going to listen to them, both of them told him that they were coming with him. But he wasn't sure about that either. He practically knew about nothing about the life in Westeros. He would have to exploit all his skills to fend for himself. How would he manage to take care of them? They were safe where they were for now, he decided. Winter is surely coming, but it wasn't the next day or even the next year. They should have at least 5 or 6 years before that. It should be enough time for him to solve all the problems and come back to them. But first he had works to do. 7 months passed after the capture of Jon Snow, and now he was in front of the clearing before the wall, about to come out on the open so someone could see him and open the gate for him. Harry was slightly behind him, watching. He dropped him off by apparition a while ago and then obliterated him. He would now remember being captured and a prisoner for the last few months. He got a chance to escape, and here he was now. He had to argue pretty hard to keep the man safe from the girl's ire. The Starks had suffered enough and he didn't want to be the cause to add more. Jon didn't even move 20 paces, a loud horn sounded. Then he calmly walked up to the gate and waited. The huge gate slowly pulled up and stopped about at 5 feet height. It was an impressive gate, about 30 feet high and made of heavy iron. It was obviously very heavy and seemed to be pulled by some pulley. He saw as Jon passed, the gate slammed heavily onto the ground immediately. A lot of things happened in the last 7 months. Harry didn't want to risk anything. He was concerned that if something happened and he couldn't return to them in time. He started working the next day after a long discussion with Mance Rayder. They rebuilt a village not very far from the wall, so when time comes people can take shelter here. He ordered all able men and women to bring any stone and wood there for the construction. There was a huge pile collected in a week. In this time he built an outline of a large fortress. He wasn't sure if he could finish this soon enough, but knew any smaller size won't do any good, as he had a vague idea of the number of the wildlings. He concentrated on the storage first. They need all the food they can get for the approaching great winter, and decided half of all the hunts should be stored here from now on. He dug a huge crater on the ground magically. It was about 100 meters on both length and width and about 10 meters deep. It took a week to finish building the storeroom alone. Another 2 days to draw all the necessary runes. Then he had to build living space for at least 10,000 people. For the next 3 months he built 80 large houses. Each house was built for 20 families. So there should be about 8,000 live there perfectly. Another month passed to draw all the necessary runes to protect he houses. Only 40 people were helping him in this enormous job, but he managed pretty well. In this time the remaining others worked on the outer wall. The two group was done about the same time. He was not very satisfied with the outer wall, but it had to do for now. It was about 20 feet high but not any means impressive. It was made of woods and only about 2 feet thick. Without his runes work it would be a child's play to breach. When he finished his will looked unimpressive. But it was now harder than stone, fireproof, impervious to climbing, immune to any insects or parasites, and contained a lot of one-way windows. He discussed about the two walls' security with Mance Rider and he approved. If somehow the outer wall was breached, then the inner wall will defend them. It was smaller and about 12 feet high and 50 meters away from the first wall. He also craved the same runes as the outer wall on it. He also cut down all the trees around the newly formed village and stored all the woods. It would do them only good if they LDC the enemy before they could come anywhere near them. It also helps that the enemy won't have any cover from their arrows when they attack. He felt very satisfied at his work when he looked back for the last time at the village. It was no longer a village but a very strong fortress. All the houses were fireproof, cold-proof, and had all the necessary requirement needed for 20 family to live there comfortably. More can live there if need arise. The main gates were as secure as the solid walls around the village. He had warded the whole village with the regular intent-based wards. He knew it was enough to defend them against a fairly large army, but also placed an ultimate security if the White Walkers did attack them. He couldn't figure out a way to stop them, but was positive that at least one thing that would work. The Philidius charm. It was extremely draining, so he couldn't do it to the whole village in the short period of time. But he added that to the store room and some houses that he made bigger inside. He made a lot of secret keepers so they could tell everyone else about the locations. It was a very busy and exhausted 6 months, but he enjoyed it greatly. He loved building and the company was also good. Igri and Val weren't talking to him at first after he refused to take them with him. He was doing his job just fine, but they couldn't stay away for long after seeing how sad and lonely he was. They always cheered him up after the long days but regularly bugged him about taking them with him. After John's departure, he decided to try for the final stage of his animagus transformation. In his dream life he took the animagus revealing potion and knew what his animagus form looked like. It was some kind of hawk. It was golden in color and was large even for the species. Here at his meditative stance he could see that he no longer had the same form. He did extensive researches about all kind of hawks and knew he was still that predatory bird. But his color changed. He was snow white now with blackish ting at the tip of the wings, looked almost gray. It had the same brilliant green eyes, but the most significant change was the size. He wasn't aware of it until he fully transformed. Igri, Val and her sister, Mance Rider and his other friends from the village were all waiting to see him transform. They all knew about wargs who could control animals and birds, but they never heard of someone changing into some animal or bird in his case. He was just as excited as they were. He didn't have time to complete his transformation before due to the wars. It was the first time he was going to try it. He always loved flying and wasn't surprised that his form was a bird. He told them what he was about to become into and concentrated. There was a sudden grasps from the crowd and he opened his eyes. The first thing he noticed was his eyesight. He never had a problem with that like in his dreams, maybe because of his proper nutrition. But now he could see even more clearly. He could see every tiny little details of thing he never noticed before. For some reason he looked at the birds very high in the air hungrily and took flight. It was amazing. He flied on a broom before, but nothing could be compared to this feeling. He could maneuver in the air even more sharply and could control every millimeters of his movements. He flew high and high, even higher than the birds on the sky. He could still see people on the ground and what they were doing. He resisted the urge to pounce as he stalked some unsuspected birds from above. He could clearly see the anxious, excited and dreamy looks he was getting, so he flew down quickly and then transformed. "So you are some big bird, aren't you?" Sobeg and some of his other friends were snickering about something. "Give him a break, he's still very cute." It was Val who defended him. But he didn't like what reactions he was getting. He could see his sister was also looking at him like some adorable puppy. Then he saw all the other females were looking at him with the same expression and males looked amused. He knew something was very wrong and took a peek at Sobek's eye, as he seemed most loud. He totally forgot about his previous indignation and looked at his form in awe. It was a native bird lived in African and Indian forest. White wasn't their color, but he was sure it was the same. He wasn't big anymore like he told them he would be, but only about 30 centimeters. He looked absolutely gorgeous and adorable. There was no wonder the looks he was getting. But sometimes appearances could be deceiving after all, he mused. Its native name was Shikar and it was indeed a hawk. The amazing thing was their powers. They were extremely strong birds and was one of the kings of the sky. Their main food is other smaller birds which they catch in the sky, and they also hunted the birds even larger than them. They also eat other insects like most birds, and if rumors are true, even small snakes weren't safe from them. They were said to be the nightmares for the people who breed pigeons. He told them this information and they listened in awe. He also liked the color better because it reminded him of his friend Hedwig. The farewell wasn't good though. He didn't see Igri of Val that day at first and wasn't willing to go without having a chance to say goodbye. He looked back again for any sign of them. There they are. He saw them at last. But what are they doing? He thought. They were both carrying a huge sack each and dumped them in front of him. Val was exhausted from the heavy work and breathing hard. So Igri answered the unspoken question. We were collecting all the things you might need and packing them for you. He didn't want to argue with them this time, and more importantly didn't want to hurt them anymore. He could see they put a lot of effort on it. And besides, he had no problem with extra things, he had magic. So he just casually shrunk the 2 sacks and put them in his pocket. None of them cried, but all 3 of them had something in their eyes at the same time. They both hugged him tightly, and after once again getting rejected made him promise to come back as soon as possible. Then vanished with a near silent pop. Despite leaving the people he considered family, he felt very excited. He was in a castle in his first 5 years of life, then the rest with the wildlings. He actually never gone to a city on his own. He knew very little about their culture and how they lived. They won't recognize him anymore, and so he can become one of them. It was just the thing he wanted all his life. To be ordinary. He may have problems but decided to keep his powers a secret. He was trained to fight without magic for more than 7 years and was confident that he would do well. Unlike many, he knew it will be in his best interest if he avoid fighting altogether, but he was Harry Potter. When that did stopped him to get into fighting. He apparated in the fours. At the edge of the clearing before the wall. Then he transformed into his animagus form and took flight. He was on top of the wall in no time, then across it. He didn't immediately transform but flied south. He knew the bird was native to hot weather but clearly enjoying the cold wind. He thought it must be something to do with the color. He flied all the way to Winterfell. It was dark now and decided to take a break. Not that he needed it, he wanted to see how people here were doing. He was about to fly down the castle, then saw a distant light. He was curious about it and deck. As he neared the place he recognized it. It was the small forest near the castle where he was kidnapped about 8 years ago. He flew down, and when he got close enough he saw who was there. It was Theon Greyjoy. His blood boiled in anger when he saw him but quickly calmed himself. It was the treacherous bastard who killed Bran and Rickon, but he need information first. Greyjoy seemed to be coming from the Godswood. Was he praying there or something else? He wondered. He silently flew down on the ground behind him and transformed back to human form. After a full body bind and full legitimacy attack, he was both worried and relieved. Relieved because the Stark brothers were actually alive, and worried about their safety. When he saw Greyjoy lying on the cold ground, he still felt disgusted. The man not only betrayed the people who raised them like their own, but also killed some innocent people and children. He left him there on the cold to slowly die and made a portkey directly for the King's Landing. War had taught him that there was always loopholes in the laws, and that only aid to the rich and the guilty people. Besides, he decided to show mercy who truly deserved. And how do like Harry's animagus form? I wanted a 5-year jump and start at the King's Landing. But it didn't feel right to some of you, just as to me. So here it is. If you don't like clearing things first, then I could go straight to action. Please write in the box below about your opinion.